Sup, my fellas. Don't forget to leave feedback, and enjoy the story. On a snowy battlefield strewn with corpses, a white bird perches on a bloodied sword among fallen banners. The bird looks around curiously amidst the desolate field. From the sword, the bird flies toward a distant fortress beyond the dead. A blond knight exhales in the freezing wind, bracing himself. The armored knight with a lion-shaped pauldron steels his resolve. He faces a horde of red-eyed orcs, sword drawn and cape billowing. His blade reflects demonic faces and blood as power gathers within it. Narration recalls that over long ages, humanity faced endless trials. Many brutal wars were fought, with swordsmen cutting down foes on every side. Out of those struggles, innumerable heroes arose to battle monstrous giants. The narrator states he was always present at the heart of those conflicts. He reveals that his existence was as the magic sword named Grohorn. Returning to the present, the Lion Knight steps forward, crushing an arrow underfoot. Now he confronts another massive orc army, readying for battle. The orc host surrounds him before the castle as he stands alone among the fallen. A gigantic enraged orc commander roars and swings his axe. The axe comes down and brutally cleaves into the knight's shoulder. The orc commander channels a red aura, empowering the countless monsters behind him. Grohorn reflects that he now stands not as a mere sword. He declares that he currently fights in the form of a knight. The knight unleashes blue elemental power, raising a wave of ice spikes. His blue eyes focus intensely as his power surges. Magic energy coils around his lips as he prepares a powerful technique. His ice blue aura spreads across snowfields, mountains, and over the castle. The narration describes snowbound lands and blood-soaked walls lying silent. The fallen defenders begin to stir as blue mana pours into them. Wounded knights rise again, infused with the sword's power. Only the blare of a war horn announcing a dawn charge breaks the silence. The kingdom's warriors rally with glowing blue weapons behind their leaders. Grohorn's current knight wears a confident smile as his blade shines. A colossal crescent of blue energy sweeps toward the orc ranks. A system-like message declares that a large-scale war event has begun with a winter theme. Leading the charge, the Lion Knight sprints forward through the storm. Narration recalls the many ancient heroes once wielded Grohorn. The sword fondly remembers one particular golden-haired knight. In the present battle, that knight slaughters orcs in a blur of steel. He continues cutting down enemies while smiling fiercely. Grohorn notes that those past heroes were his friends. They were also his teachers and his own students. One silver-haired swordsman channels the sword's power to cleave a giant orc. The narrator says every legend those warriors created ultimately stemmed from him. A long-haired woman heroically bisects a monster with Grohorn. Back at the current battlefield, the Lion Knight calmly adjusts his collar despite wounds. Someone opens their eyes, transitioning from memory to present awareness. Grohorn explains that, in the current age of tribulation, a new great orc leader has appeared. The monstrous chieftain charges, roaring in fury. Blue flames flare in a human eye as Grohorn's consciousness awakens again. The battered knight powers up, enveloped in blue energy. Grohorn and his knight clash head-on with the orc leader, vowing to fight. The orc leader reels, struck by their combined assault. After victory, the Lion Knight stands before a setting sun and falling enemy. He smiles softly, satisfied yet weary. Grohorn resolves to become a legendary myth once more. A fiery cosmic being appears, signifying the narrator's reincarnation process. He states that he was reborn into the world in the form of a sword. Over centuries he met many wielders, serving countless masters. He guided them into heroes remembered in history. Eventually he encountered one he calls his true comrade, a rugged knight. Together they carved through monsters, including bats, beasts, and undead. That comrade began as a village boy from remote Leonberg. They traveled the world, fighting side by side. Their partnership achieved unmatched heroic feats. Time jumps to the Frost Mountains, where storms gather ominously. In that final battle, devastating magic erupts amid snow and rock. The older knight staggers, coughing blood while gripping Grohorn. He kneels in a blizzard, bracing himself with the sword. A colossal white dragon towers before him, dwarfing the mountains. The enraged dragon roars, releasing waves of pink energy. The knight faces it unflinchingly, prepared for a last stand. He fires a titanic beam of light straight into the dragon's chest. Grohorn ignites with blue flames in his hand. The knight unleashes a massive mixed blue-pink explosion against the dragon. Smiling through his injuries, he urges his sword companion to fight with him. He then surrounds himself with blue aura, challenging the dragon again. In a final charge, he drives Grohorn toward the dragon's heart. The attack tears through the dragon, shattering ice and sky. Narration leads into the climax, saying that at last their struggle reached its end. The killing stroke cleaves the dragon as bright energy envelopes it. Grohorn recalls that this was when they slew the white dragon of the Frost Mountains. As a result, his comrade was elevated to kingship over a realm. Grohorn himself became a revered relic enshrined as the dragon slayer's sword. Honoring his dying comrade's wish, Grohorn was entrusted to that royal bloodline. Much later, in darkness, voices and noises intrude on the sword's slumber. Grohorn awakens groggily, wondering why everything has become so noisy. Feeling himself shaken, he irritably demands to know who dares disturb his body. A fat blonde prince triumphantly declares that he is now the sword's master, shocking onlookers. A knight panics, insisting that only the king may touch that sacred item and begging the prince to return it. Hearing the term prince, Grohorn realizes the wielder is royal. Seeing the gluttonous, arrogant boy, the sword derisively compares him to a pig as the prince boasts nothing is off limits to him. Grohorn senses something is wrong and grows uneasy. He invokes his special authority of judgment to assess this new master. A status window reveals the boy is Adrian Leonberg, a 16-year-old with no aptitude and a list of terrible traits, confirming he is Leonberg's descendant. Grohorn is appalled that such a useless heir comes from the Sword Saint's line, while Adrian greedily imagines the power he'll gain. Adrian believes possessing Grohorn will finally force the king and nobles to acknowledge him. Grohorn dismisses him as ridiculous, annoyed by his delusions. Adrian theatrically prays to the famed dragon slayer for power, but Grohorn flatly refuses to aid someone like him. The prince screams Grohorn's name in desperation. He wildly brandishes the sword inside the palace, guards and maids freaking out and begging him to stop. Furious at being ordered around, Adrian threatens the servants while rampaging with the blade. He convinces himself that if he gains Grohorn's power, all the trash opposing him will be beneath him. In his frenzy, Adrian charges forward recklessly. He trips and falls, losing control of the sword as he crashes. The flying blade impales a guard's hand and continues onward. Everyone screams in horror as the sword hurtles toward an onlooker. A maid gasps, then someone shouts the prince's title in panic. Adrian lies on the floor with Grohorn buried in his chest, blood pooling as people rush to help and call the royal physician. Grohorn realizes in shock that the one stabbed by him is this foolish prince. As Adrian's vision fades, he senses himself dying. Grohorn feels himself about to faint for the first time in his existence as a sword. Narration explains that Prince Adrian was infamous as talentless, arrogant, and greedy, unfit to inherit the throne. He is described further as a stupid, lazy, cruel pig of a first prince. After he hovered near death and unexpectedly survived, rumors began spreading through the kingdom. Palace maids gossip that Prince Adrian seems to have changed recently. They speculate he is only behaving himself out of shame or fear and will soon revert. The narrator notes that Adrian himself pays no mind to such rumors. Grohorn realizes with horror that by possessing this body he has killed his comrade's descendant and stolen his life. A maid announces that the king has arrived and urges Adrian to prepare to greet him. Adrian, now hosting Grohorn's soul, grumbles that his father ignored him while he was dying and wonders why he visits now. The maid nervously urges caution in his words, as a stern silver-haired knight appears behind her. The knight remarks that although Adrian returned from death, his temper seems unchanged. He dismisses the maid, saying the king expects nothing from Adrian, while Grohorn wonders who this man is. The knight reminds Adrian that they share a master-student bond and accuses him of pretending not to know him. Grohorn, inside Adrian, guesses this must be the pig's former teacher. He feigns confusion, claiming his memories are in disarray, which alarms the knight. A servant announces the king's entrance, and Grohorn reacts to the mention of the monarch. Grohorn notes drily that the approaching king must be this scoundrel prince's father. Seeing the king, he is surprised and judges him more impressive than expected. Grohorn revises his opinion, thinking the royal blood may not be as degraded as he feared. Narration comments that, contrary to expectations, the king himself seems competent and composed as he addresses Adrian. When the knight informs the king of Adrian's memory loss, the court panics and calls for the royal physician to examine him. The physician checks the resting prince while knights and maids look on anxiously. He reports Adrian's body is entirely healthy. The physician suggests Adrian's condition may be temporary memory loss brought on by mental shock. Hearing this, Grohorn worries they might see through him. The king coldly calls the timing suspiciously convenient. He challenges whether Adrian thinks forgetting means his past misdeeds never occurred. The king lectures that people may err, but growth comes from recognizing and not repeating their mistakes. He accuses Adrian of having forgotten all such lessons. Because Adrian remembers nothing, the king says he has not advanced at all from his past wrongs. Growing more heated, the king declares that Adrian will remain stuck and useless if nothing changes, while others beg him to calm down and Grohorn feels verbally flayed. Grohorn inwardly curses his situation, realizing he will not even be treated as human, let alone as a prince. He wonders in dismay just how badly the original Adrian must have behaved. The king pointedly calls Adrian by his personal name, jolting Grohorn. The queen rushes in, tearfully embracing Adrian and saying she knows how confused he must be, promising his memories will return. She insists his forgotten past is trivial and unimportant, smothering him affectionately. Stroking his cheeks, she laments that his once beautiful face has wasted away. While Grohorn mentally protests that he still looks plenty chubby, she adds that she is simply happy to see him awake and conscious again. Cradling him, she begs him never to touch dangerous objects like the sacred sword again and says she would have been devastated if he had not awakened. Adrian sits awkwardly in her arms, overwhelmed by his mother's doting. Grohorn, looking at the grieving queen, thinks guiltily that although she clings to her son, Adrian himself actually died when the sword took over his body. Someone laments that their current situation feels very burdensome as the scene shifts to a grand castle at night. The queen gently tells the chubby young prince to rest and that she will visit him again. After she leaves, the prince wakes with a bitter chuckle. He remembers that a comrade once asked him to protect his descendants, yet he ended up killing one of them. Tormented, he admits that even if it was accidental, he is the one who took that descendant's life. Resolving himself, he decides he must live well on behalf of the person he killed. He explains that after being reincarnated as a sword, he spent his life cleaning up after others, and although this new body is talentless and fat, that no longer matters. He concludes that all he needs is to rebuild his power from scratch. Confident in his experience raising many disciples, he readies himself to do so again. He states that the first step is to forge something called a mana heart. He begins channeling mana, glowing energy spilling from his mouth. Blue mana floods around him and condenses in his chest as he attempts to form the mana heart. The mana violently churns as he pushes the process further. The unstable mana bursts apart, scattering around his body. Startled and in pain, he realizes something has gone wrong with his chest. He concludes the mana has dispersed because this weak body cannot properly accept it. Undeterred, he forces himself to try forming a mana heart again. He grits his teeth and pours even more mana into the attempt. He repeatedly urges himself on, driving mana back into his chest over and over. Exhausted, he collapses as the mana once more explodes outward. Writhing on the floor, he curses this body and how impossible it seems to handle mana. Still reeling, he keeps shouting in disbelief at how awful this body's condition is. He screams that if he still had his original sword body he could easily fix such a constitution by brute forcing mana into it. A servant knocks and respectfully asks permission to enter the prince's chambers. A maid brings a steaming cup, explaining it is a restorative medicine the queen has sent for his health. She nervously asks him to drink it for the queen's sake despite its bitterness. Remembering past tantrums, she anxiously watches him for any sign he might throw the bowl again. She recalls the previous time when he violently hurled the medicine, shouting that he refused to drink it. Seeing the medicine now, he suddenly reacts with surprise. He recognizes that the liquid she brought is infused with mana. Acting quickly, he grabs the bowl from the startled maid's tray. He gulps down the entire contents without hesitation. The maid is left speechless, stunned by his uncharacteristic compliance. Slamming the empty bowl down, he curtly tells her he has finished and orders her to leave. As she hastily agrees and backs out, he thinks to himself that he can now try forming a mana heart one more time. Drawing on the medicine's power, he surrounds himself with blue flames and begins the mana heart ritual again. Feeling the new mana settle, he notes with relief that this time the method seems to be working. He judges that although the amount of mana stored is meager and will dissipate quickly, it is at least a functional start. He rushes after the maid in the corridor and calls out to her. Pointing at the tray, he bluntly asks if there is any more of that medicinal drink. Several days later, his hand burns with blue mana, showing that his mana capacity has steadily increased. Smiling darkly, he mutters that at last the moment he has been waiting for has arrived. Overjoyed, he declares he can finally forge a proper mana heart with the power he has accumulated. He recalls that he has created mana hearts countless times before and believes he can do it again with ease. As the process begins, his expression twists in shock at the sudden intensity. Agonized, he remembers belatedly that forging a mana heart is inherently excruciating. Memories surface of others screaming that the process felt like their insides were burning and their chests were about to explode. He clutches his chest and realizes that such suffering is actually normal when forming a mana heart. Accepting this, he braces himself and acknowledges that pain was always part of the procedure. He warns himself not to black out, knowing that losing consciousness mid-process would be disastrous. He pictures the deadly mana backflow that can destroy a body if the user passes out while forming a mana heart. Drenched in sweat, he forces himself to stay awake through sheer willpower. Kneeling amid surging mana, he repeats that he must focus completely on controlling it. He methodically seizes the rampaging clump of mana, reminding himself there is no need to rush. He guides the mana slowly along the pathways around his heart, following the proper flow. He lets the newly formed heart of mana permeate and integrate with his physical heart. The energy settles like a drop of water spreading calm ripples through a lake. At last the wild mana quiets, leaving him standing with a steady blue glow at his chest. Panting, he checks himself and confirms the process seems to have succeeded. Overwhelmed, he feels the strong, rhythmic beat in his chest and whispers that it is finally there. Gazing at the condensed blue core in his hand's perception, he notes this mana heart was crafted for himself rather than for someone else. Laughing triumphantly, he proclaims he has completed a mana heart solely for his own use. He exults aloud that he has indeed created a mana heart in this body. As he revels in victory, something strange catches his eye and makes him pause. A golden notification appears before him, stating that a mana heart has been created, and he wonders if this is some kind of status window. He realizes the window's style is identical to the status messages he used to send to wielders when he was a sword and questions why it is now visible to him. Another notice announces that a connection to his origin is being restored, leaving him alarmed and confused. Multiple system messages flash by, saying the connection is unstable, most authorities are unavailable, but a limited form of judgment now lets him gauge opponents' potential. Further notices state that he has gained extremely limited access to third eye and third ear authorities, enhancing his sight and hearing. Looking out the window, he mutters about these so-called authorities and tries to comprehend their effects. When he focuses, the tree outside suddenly sharpens into astonishing clarity. Examining the leaves, he confirms he can now see the world far more clearly than before. Testing his hearing, he muses about internal sound and realizes he might be catching conversations not meant for him. He clearly hears maids beyond the door gossiping that his usual temper would have caused a scene already, confirming he can eavesdrop outside. Suddenly a sharp pain stabs his head, making him cry out. New warnings tell him his internal mana is depleted and all authority use is being forcibly shut down. Holding his head, he understands that this brutal headache is what the phrase, extremely limited, truly meant. He reflects that compared to his former sword body, which could sense everything in all directions without blind spots, these new senses are feeble. He notes that the absolute perception he once had as a sword has vanished completely. For now, with only a tiny trickle of magic power, he can merely see a bit better and overhear nearby sounds. Clenching his fist, he resolves that once he enlarges his mana pool, those authorities should evolve. As he thinks this, his stomach growls loudly. Scowling, he admits to himself that he is simply very hungry. Servants rush to promise food immediately while he decides his top priority is adapting properly to this human body. The queen visits, overjoyed and praising her son for being so admirable. Hugging his face, she gushes that he finished every drop of her medicine and must finally be taking care of his health. As she cuddles him, someone approaches, prompting him to acknowledge their arrival. A stern man in black, her brother and thus his uncle, appears and asks if the prince recognizes him. The boy honestly replies that he does not. Concluding the boy truly lost his memory, the queen begs her brother to help guide this child. The prince realizes the man is the queen's only brother, and thus his sole uncle, watching the exchange cautiously. The uncle scoffs that the boy did not lose anything valuable in forgetting such a troubled past, and seems visibly displeased with him. The prince decides he should clarify matters himself before any misunderstandings deepen. The uncle remarks that all he can really do is help the prince get rid of some of his excess fat, which shocks the boy. He warns that he will offer no more than that and tells his sister not to expect miracles, while she insists even such help is enough. The prince is left confused, peppered with question marks at this unexpected offer of harsh training. The uncle eyes him with a cold, intimidating gaze that promises strict discipline. Training begins with the boy being thrown to the ground, crying out as he falls. The uncle declares that from now on every action, from eating to breathing, requires his permission and that the prince should abandon expectations of special treatment. He adds that if the boy truly tries his best, he might be willing to teach him a little of the family's secret swordsmanship. The prince considers it absurd that the legendary instructor of an undefeated knight and a founding king is talking down to him like this. The uncle taunts that the prince's trembling fat shows how resentful he must feel. The boy straightens and addresses him, proposing they make a bet. He vows that within half a year he will force his uncle to acknowledge him, determined to shatter that arrogant gaze. He stakes the bet by saying that if he fails he will obey any command his uncle gives. In return, he demands that if he succeeds, his uncle must grant him a wish, which the older man finds amusing. The uncle accepts, saying he welcomes at least one source of entertainment in this dreary life. Later, the prince pants heavily during training, admitting he boasted too much for how weak this body currently is. Frustrated, he curses his sluggish, out-of-shape body that refuses to move the way he wants. Mana begins to swirl faintly at his feet as he contemplates another approach. He concludes he has to burn mana actively and decides to focus on using it to burn away the fat all over his body. Watching this, the uncle is startled and begins to suspect what the boy has done. When their spar escalates, the uncle swings, and the boy instinctively counters with mana, shocking the older man. The prince stands with a blank look, blue energy still flickering around him. His uncle, stunned, demands to know if he actually created a mana heart in that body. The boy casually admits that he did so not long ago and asks if the man already regrets their bet. The uncle snaps, asking what he was thinking creating a mana heart at all. He then presses, wanting to know where the boy learned the technique and pointing out that he clearly does not understand the mistake he has made. The prince, confused, starts to repeat the concept of a mana heart, while wondering what problem his uncle means. The uncle explains that a mana heart is considered an outdated, crude technique now used only by low-level mercenaries, leaving the boy aghast. The revelation echoes in the boy's mind as he internally shouts in disbelief. His loud exclamation of shock rings across the castle grounds. Sitting later with hands clasped, he gloomily concludes that his cherished method has become an obsolete relic of a bygone era. His uncle repeats that mana hearts are crude methods for lesser fighters, underlining how out of date the boy's approach is. The prince stares in disbelief, sweating as he absorbs how much the world's techniques have changed. Flustered, he demands to know exactly what his uncle means, and the man replies that it will be faster to demonstrate. The uncle gathers mana in a smooth ring around his hand and tells the boy to watch closely. Using his enhanced vision, the prince sees that the uncle's mana is shaped into a clean circular ring rather than a clump. The uncle then unleashes a powerful ring-shaped slash of mana toward him. The blast crashes into the boy's hastily raised mana, overwhelming his defenses. Surrounded by fragments of energy, the uncle explains that these structures are mana chains, which can shatter sword energy from a mana heart, and are far easier and more stable to create. He adds that even a once-renowned family that clung to mana hearts was ruined a century ago, so no one seriously uses that method today. Later, the prince studies a book titled Mana Chain Basic Theory and admits that times truly have changed. He reads how mages build circles while knights weave chains of mana to grow stronger. The book details that a knight's rank is measured by how many chains they have formed. It lists the chain stages from single up to pentachain, showing the power progression. Closing the book, he concedes that this system is not complete nonsense after all. He notices the author's lineage, recognizing the name Altrinjan and mulling over where he heard it. Suddenly he remembers and reacts as the memory surfaces. He recalls that long ago, while he was still a sword, someone asked if he was the famed sword saint. He remembers a cloaked swordsman introducing himself as Ernest Altrinjan and challenging him to see who truly deserved the title of sword saint. Back in the present, he remarks that no wonder the name Altrinjan sounded so familiar. Leaning on his desk, he idly wonders what became of that old rival. Time passes and the scene shifts to a bright new day over the castle. Out in the yard, the prince warms up for training while armored knights look on. His uncle asks if he actually read the Mana Chain book the night before. The uncle says that by now the boy should realize how foolish his earlier choice of cultivating a mana heart was. The prince answers casually. Smirking, he insists he does not think he made any mistake at all. The uncle, exasperated, questions whether the boy is refusing to accept reality or truly does not understand the situation. Manifesting mana in his hand again, the uncle begins to explain that not all mana hearts are identical, hinting at deeper distinctions. The narrator recalls the phrase difference in class while unleashing blue mana. The uncle initially thinks the boy is speaking nonsense. The uncle explains that some mercenaries imagine themselves ancient heroes and asks what became of them. He says such people all stalled at 2 rings and faded away. The boy is challenged to prove he is different by defeating a double chain knight. The uncle promises to become his guardian if he accomplishes that, as the boy's mother wants. The boy wonders if having his uncle as guardian will truly be good for him. They face each other in the training yard, observed by knights. The uncle, offended, asks if his qualification as guardian is being doubted. He declares himself a count, Northern Army commander, and more. He adds that he is master of the Black Lancers and one of the king's 5 silver lions. He releases overwhelming 4-ring power. He reveals he is a quad chain knight. He gives his name, Vale Balorhard, as the man who might stand behind the boy. He asks if that is sufficient qualification, while the boy braces himself. Knights tense, readying weapons at the display. One knight even draws his sword in alarm. The captain orders Count Balorhard to stand down. The uncle withdraws with a smirk. The boy warns his uncle not to go back on his word later. After a brutal training bout, the exhausted boy collapses and the uncle ends the session. Later, the boy lies half on a table, completely drained. He shudders, thinking he almost died from the training. He remembers his uncle mocking his attempt to gain recognition and saying he is not even at single chain level. Staggering down the hall, the boy grumbles that his uncle is devilish. He enters his room where someone has been waiting for him. The visitor is the royal physician, humbled to be remembered. The boy, surprised, learns the queen ordered healing magic for him. The physician approaches with glowing healing magic and politely invites the boy over. The boy panics and angrily throws him out, saying he does not need it. Fuming, the boy refuses to let the suffering he endured today go to waste. His knight escort silently watches his temper. At the next meal, the third prince calls out, asking if his brother is there. The third prince enters confidently, smirking. During the formal meal, the protagonist eyes his soup while watching him. He silently wonders what is up with this guy. His escort whispers that this is His Highness the third prince, which shocks the boy. The prince says he heard about an accident but is disappointed his brother looks fine. The boy bluntly asks what he wants and accuses him of coming just to pick a fight. The prince seethes, thinking his brother is the fool who stabbed himself. He restrains himself, and says he has heard some interesting news. He reveals he heard about the bet with Count Balorhard to duel a double chain knight. He leans in with a sly smile and says about that. He proposes himself as the opponent for that duel. Later, after the prince leaves, the boy sits brooding at the table with his escort behind him. He internally complains about how twisted Liam Burke descendants are. The escort explains that third prince Gillian is famous for his sword talent since childhood. He adds the prince reached second ring at 14, making him indeed fast. A maid nervously interrupts the boy's work. She hurriedly delivers a large stack of letters addressed to him. The boy, bewildered, wonders why people who never cared about this body are suddenly sending letters. He opens them, puzzled. His maid watches as he starts reading through the pile. The letters are mostly formal apologies coupled with requests to duel him, begging for the first opportunity. He interprets them as everyone seeing this as a legal chance to beat him up. Smiling darkly, he concludes he has become an easy target. He calls the maid back over. He orders her to write down the names of everyone who sent those letters. Back in the yard, a wooden practice sword clatters to the ground. The boy looks on, confused. The uncle orders him to pick up the sword. He says the boy must know at least basic swordsmanship for their bet to mean anything and that he will not accept excuses about lacking fundamentals. The boy grumbles internally that his uncle could have just handed him the sword more kindly. As he grips it, his body trembles from pain. He screams melodramatically about muscle pain to avoid training. The uncle stops him and asks if he did not receive healing magic. He reminds the boy that knights know healing magic only restores, not grows, muscles. He explains flatly that healing returns muscles to their previous state and cannot build strength. He relents though, saying that was not his main point today. He tells the boy he actually wanted to discuss something else. Drawing his blade, he tells the boy to watch carefully because he will not repeat this. He demonstrates the kingdom's basic training sword style that forms all knights' foundations. Energy flares along his sword as he prepares the technique. His eyes sharpen with intense focus. He executes a series of flowing, powerful slashes. The technique continues with a huge sweeping strike. The boy watches his uncle's form in mid-swing. The glowing sword carves arcs as the demonstration finishes. The uncle completes the form with a final decisive cut. The power of the swing leaves a massive mark on the ground around him. The boy stands stunned by what he just saw. Recovering, he asks to confirm that this is only a basic training style for knights. The uncle glances at him skeptically. He says that while the style lacks sharpness, it is the best for learning fundamentals and may even be too much given the boy's talent. Suddenly sensing something odd, he looks over in surprise. The boy bursts out laughing, overwhelmed by what he realized. He recalls that the Dragon Slayer swordsmanship, which once decapitated the Mad Dragon, is the same technique. He is outraged that such a legendary art is now treated as trivial training. The uncle continues that this alone cannot win the bet and suggests the boy later seek another teacher. The boy cuts him off, declaring he will learn no other swordsmanship because this one is enough. The uncle is left speechless by that resolve. He finally concedes and tells the boy to do as he wishes, while the boy grips his practice sword tightly. The boy begins imitating the form with a heavy downward swing. He thinks about how this Dragon Slayer style has been reduced to a simple training form. He admits it is natural given the current version lacks its original intent. He reflects that the style no longer carries the will to slay dragons. He thinks that people who abandon the mana heart and the swords will cannot appreciate Dragon Slayer's true worth. He keeps drilling the form, his wooden sword striking the ground repeatedly. The uncle steps in, correcting him as he practices. He scolds that merely tensing his arms will not put power into the sword and asks if he has already forgotten the demonstration. He whacks the boy in the stomach to show a weak spot. Then he hits his legs as well to reinforce his point. He explains that real sword power comes from channeling strength through the whole body. The boy quietly acknowledges the lesson. He admits to himself that his body is still weak and clumsy, barely imitating even a degraded Dragon Slayer. Nevertheless, he vows to prove that Dragon Slayer is not obsolete junk to be discarded. Training continues day after day as his footsteps pound the yard. He runs and pushes himself over multiple days, then 3, under his uncle's watch. After a week he is still swinging, more steadily. He also sits alone, cultivating his mana heart with intense focus. Time passes and a month goes by in this harsh regimen. System messages appear stating his constitution has improved and his morbid obesity trait has become general obesity, with faster metabolism. Further notifications say he has grown used to his body, lost the clumsy trait, and his exercise efficiency has greatly increased. Additional messages report that consistent mana training has changed his constitution. His mana sensitivity disorder disappears and is replaced with heightened mana sensitivity. He now swings the sword far more smoothly than a month ago. Sweat pours as he continues lifting the blade overhead. He notes, he feels stronger than yesterday. He senses each swing becoming more perfect than the one before. So engrossed, he ignores a shout to stop and keeps slashing. His strikes dig into the wet stone, splashing water. In a storm-soaked yard, he and his uncle continue training while another knight looks on. The uncle's hand bleeds where he has grabbed the boy's sword to halt him. Blood drips to the ground, showing how far the session has gone. The boy finally comes back to himself, and weakly calls to his uncle. He stares in shock at what he has done. The scene shifts to a heavy training post broken by his last strike. The cracked post still stands but bears clear signs of the destructive blow. The boy looks horrified at his own power. The uncle explodes, calling him a fool for training so recklessly in this weather. He scolds that a real sword would have injured him badly. The boy gazes at his own hands, covered in blisters and blood. New messages declare he has awakened from extreme concentration, retained its sensation, and gained a hyperfocus trait. He lets out a weak laugh at this development. He jokes internally that if he pushed that focus again he might be struck by lightning and die. Collapsing, he is carried off while a knight rushes over shouting for his highness. His uncle looks down at him, rain mixing with tears on his face. The uncle calls him a foolish brat, but clearly cares. The boy later wakes up groggily in his bed. Realizing where he is, he wonders if he blacked out. He admits he misjudged the limits of this body. He reflects that in his past life as a sword he had already achieved titles like Nameless War Hero, Sword Master, and Mercenary King. He remembers also being hailed as the founder of the kingdom. He recalls leading wars, raising heroes' strength, and guiding their paths. He names himself Grohorn, once a wise advisor and excellent teacher in sword form. Yet he notes that as a sword he was always only a third-party observer. That is why he now swings the sword himself, relishing that the effort and results are finally his own. He concludes that if he keeps going at this pace, his frail body will break, so he must balance mind and body. Sitting to meditate, he notes it has been over a month since forming his mana heart, and that he has gathered enough mana to advance to the next stage. Blue mana flares around him as he calmly prepares for that next advancement. The system acknowledges that through steady effort he has accumulated mana to a significant level. Mana surges around his body as he channels the gathered energy into himself. The notification states that his body can now endure a greater amount of mana. It further announces that his mana heart has enlarged. He concentrates the blazing mana into his hand, testing his control. Another message confirms his physique can now bear slightly more mana. The system notes that his body's very constitution has changed due to the expanded mana heart. He opens his eyes in shock, realizing his transformation. Overjoyed, he exclaims that he has finally succeeded. Grinning at a nearby sword, he decides to test his new power. He grabs the sword's hilt to begin. The system proclaims he has reached the rank of sword learner and gained access to basic aura. He reflects that with aura on his sword he can now at least handle the fundamentals. Outside, a knight tells him rumors about him are spreading throughout the kingdom, and he asks about them. The knight brings up the prince's reckless public bet and complains that it has even annoyed him. The prince suggests it would be best to quickly find a dual opponent, then vaguely acknowledges the matter. Another noble appears as a prospective opponent. The prince smirks and says he has already chosen who he will fight. Elsewhere, a young man tells his uncle it would be difficult to fight a double-chain knight immediately and asks to duel single-chain opponents first, and his uncle agrees. Back at the training grounds, the prince calls to Karl and asks about the thing he requested. Karl respectfully hands him a compiled list of everyone who sent him duel requests. Karl hesitantly asks if the prince plans to use those challengers for practice matches. Karl warns that most listed nobles resent the prince, and might try to seriously harm him under the pretext of duels. The prince says he already knows that, hinting he has a reason. He then tells his uncle that he will need him to act as referee. The prince asks only that his uncle prevent anyone from dying during the duels, calling it a small favor. A few days later, on the first duel day, a nervous young noble stares at the arena. He arrives at the first prince's grand palace, thinking bitterly of the scoundrel who lives there. He introduces himself in narration as Taylor Talheim, second son of a minor baron family. A flashback begins, showing the former scoundrel prince mocking Taylor's relative at a royal banquet years ago. The old prince ridicules Taylor's family as country bumpkins before the crowd, deeply dishonoring Taylor's father and brother. Taylor explains that since that incident his family's honor has been trampled and they remain the noble's laughingstock, all because of Adrian Leonberg. Vowing to make Adrian pay for that humiliation today, Taylor formally greets the first prince in the arena. Taylor introduces himself aloud as the Talheim family's second son, an apprentice knight of their house style, while Adrian casually comments that it is only a practice match. Adrian, looking unimpressive and overweight, even wonders aloud if Taylor is truly a knight because he appears weak. Taylor sees, thinking the rumors about Adrian's arrogance and lack of sense are true, until the referee orders him to calm down. Adrian's uncle tells Taylor he understands his anger but reminds him the duel has not yet started and urges him to pull back his fighting spirit. Taylor blushes and excitedly exclaims Lord Balerhard's name, clearly admiring the famous knight. He bows deeply, saying it is an honor to meet Balerhard, who politely returns the greeting. Watching Taylor fawn over his uncle, Adrian mutters that people might mistake Balerhard for the prince instead of him. Balerhard reproaches Adrian that his past behavior brought all this trouble, while Adrian grumbles about him always bringing up old misdeeds. Balerhard orders both fighters to take their positions and announces the start of the duel. Adrian and Taylor face each other with crossed blades, tension high. Taylor ignites his mana chain, enveloping himself and his sword in bright aura. Power surging, Taylor warns Adrian to be careful as he prepares to attack. Taylor dashes in with a powerful aura charge slash aimed at the prince. Their weapons clash violently, sending shockwaves through the arena. Taylor follows up with another huge, downward blow, but Adrian firmly blocks it. Adrian calmly observes that Taylor's movements are wasteful and inefficient. In the next exchange, Adrian's aura-coated strike meets Taylor's attack head-on. Taylor suddenly senses the presence of a mana heart within Adrian's aura, something he did not expect. Adrian's counter-strike smashes through Taylor's assault and sends him flying. Taylor is thrown hard into the ground, the impact cracking the stone. Shaken, he mutters that a simple mana heart should not be able to resist a mana chain and wonders if it is because Adrian has only one ring. Adrian, barely bothered, says the attack only made his chest tingle a little. Taylor reacts in disbelief as he realizes how little damage he has done. Observing from the sidelines, Carl and the knights hear a strange sound from Adrian's sword and question what it is. Balerhard recognizes it with alarm as sword resonance. As the sword hums with energy, Taylor thinks to himself in shock that this cannot be happening. He charges again, yelling in denial, blade crackling with aura. Adrian is momentarily surprised by the renewed ferocity. Taylor's frenzied blows rain down on Adrian, who struggles under the assault and groans. Taylor continues his wild barrage, screaming as he hammers away at Adrian's guard. The clashing aura erupts in a blinding explosion of light and force. Amid the blast, a figure's feet skid and splash through the dust as they're pushed back. When the dust settles, Taylor is panting while Adrian stands with sword lowered, still on his feet. Adrian reflects that people say ring mana and heart mana are incompatible, and he acknowledges that this is true. He notes that combining both makes him feel close to mana backflow, as if his mana heart might rupture at any moment. Nevertheless, focusing on Taylor, Adrian asks if he said he was Baron Talheim's second son. Adrian tells Taylor he needs to cool his head. He closes his eyes and concentrates, repeating to himself to focus on his senses. In his mind's eye he appears submerged in water, sinking deeper into his inner world. Underwater, he reaches out and commands something within himself to awaken. Narration explains that whether his blade is called Demon Sword, Holy Sword, or anything else, it is all the same to him. A massive dragon-like spirit appears, suggesting the many names tied to the weapon's legend. Adrian's hand touches the spectral sword, which is described as containing part of his own soul. The system reports that his mana heart has accepted a tremendous will and gained a distinct color. It specifies that a dormant will to slay dragons inside him has now awakened. The sword's memory of hunting dragons and the heart's dragon slayer essence combine within Adrian. The system declares that the dragon slayer's heart has been activated. Adrian's eyes turn crimson, reflecting that awakened power. A dragon-shaped aura coils around him as he is encased in a killing intent forged solely for slaying dragons. Narration calls this the true power of the dragon-slaying sword, whose energy now flows from his heart into the blade. Taylor stares in horror as Adrian's crimson dragon aura towers over him. Trembling, Taylor can barely comprehend what he is seeing. Balerhard, realizing the danger, shouts for the duel to stop. Consumed by berserk killing intent, Adrian launches himself at Taylor to strike. A flashback shows Adrian asking his uncle for one favor before they spar. He explains that if it ever looks like he is about to kill his opponent, his uncle must intervene. In the present, as Adrian's killing blow descends, that previous request hangs over the scene. Balerhard fulfills the promise by charging in with overwhelming power to stop his nephew. Their clash sends Adrian hurtling away and smashes the ground. Balerhard stands with swirling aura, having subdued Adrian in a single powerful move. Adrian lies battered against the shattered wall at his uncle's feet. Balerhard turns away, his decisive strike having ended the berserk episode. Other knights surround him with swords drawn, accusing him of possibly committing regicide. Adrian rises unsteadily and orders them to stand down, saying he himself asked Balarhard to do that. He admits he did ask, but grumbles that he never told his uncle to knock him completely unconscious. Smiling wryly, he complains that he never asked to be knocked out while everyone else looks shocked. His mana heart pulses violently, still swirling with excess blue energy. Catching his breath, he thinks his mana heart had nearly cracked under the strain. He acknowledges that his uncle's strength is on another level compared to a single chain knight, and that he took that blow head on. Examining his chest, he notes with relief that there seem to be no lasting side effects despite the danger. He concludes cheerfully that everything turned out fine since he ultimately won the duel. Later, lounging in his room, Adrian is asked why he is smiling to himself and snaps back from his thoughts. Balarhard visits and demands to know what exactly Adrian did out there. Furious, Balarhard calls Adrian's dragon-slaying technique an unrighteous sword he never taught him. Adrian calmly answers that he only followed what he believes to be the essence of the sword. Balarhard inwardly scoffs that Adrian speaks of the sword's essence without any real combat experience. He muses that, to Adrian, the sword's essence is pure killing intent, which while unsettling is also undeniably part of the truth. Balarhard concedes aloud that Adrian's view is indeed one kind of truth. Adrian is surprised by this unexpected acknowledgement. Adrian remarks that he thought his uncle would lecture him with lofty ideals about the sword instead of accepting that view. Balarhard explains that he is a soldier, not a chivalrous knight, and values victory over righteousness. Adrian listens intently as his uncle prepares to add a caveat. Balarhard warns that Adrian's sword goes too far and that excessive killing intent will eventually blur the line between friend and foe. Adrian replies that all this scolding is just his uncle's way of trying to correct that problem. Balarhard says he will keep watching Adrian to see whether he is consumed by inner demons or controls them. Narration jumps ahead to after 3 days of practice duels have passed. On the last day, Adrian addresses Taylor by name as they square off again. Adrian commends Taylor for his hard work during those 3 grueling days. Narration explains that during that time Taylor had to continually block Adrian's sword overflowing with unstable killing intent. Adrian reflects that Taylor truly endured a lot, though he thinks it is a pity for Taylor. He teases that Taylor probably wanted at least one chance to beat him but never managed it. Adrian then calls to a maid and tells her to bring forward a chest. The maid nervously carries an ornate chest and asks what it is for. Adrian says he knows the former scoundrel prince did terrible things to Taylor's family, and that this is meant as some form of amends. He instructs Taylor to deliver the chest, containing gold and a letter, to Baron Talheim. After handing over the gift, Adrian tells Taylor to travel home safely. Adrian thinks that although he is not obligated to fix the previous prince's mess, if someone works for you he deserves to be compensated, while Taylor thanks him profusely. Narration recounts that this scoundrel prince's practice duel quickly became the hottest topic in the kingdom. Meanwhile, spiteful nobles gossip that the first prince will soon be punished and humiliated for his past misdeeds. But even after waiting, the scandalous news they expected never arrives, leaving them confused. Instead, word spreads that the duel was just a misunderstanding. Both sides fought earnestly, and the prince was not as bad as the rumors claimed, with Taylor's uncle and others publicly supporting Adrian's sincerity. The disappointed schemers assumed the royal family must have silenced Taylor and his allies. Narration adds that when Adrian hears that claim, he slams his fist down in outrage. He shouts that Taylor only stayed quiet because he was embarrassed about losing to him. Muttering that these nobles have nothing better to do, Adrian complains they should find productive work, while his uncle dryly notes Adrian is hardly one to talk. Later, Adrian glares at a nervous courtier holding another chest, clearly intimidating him. With a fiery aura behind him, Adrian forces the man to promise he will also spread the true result of the duel wherever he goes. Adrian then thinks to himself that the rumors should finally die down. Moments later, he is told there is now a rumor he coerced Taylor into faking the duel results, leaving him stunned. The maid awkwardly explains that people claim he threatened Taylor to fabricate the outcome. Adrian falls into exasperated silence, darkly brooding. He decides to ignore the gossip and instead throws himself back into intense sword training. He resumes practicing, swinging his aura-coated sword in powerful arcs. He continues slashing again and again, refining his technique. His movements grow sharper and more fluid as blue aura trails behind each strike. He unleashes an especially massive, focused slash, pushing his limits. The sequence ends with a close view of his blazing blue sword as it cleaves through the air, symbolizing his relentless drive to grow stronger. The prince channels intense blue mana, preparing for battle. He asks his knight Karl how many duel challengers remain and hears today's opponent will be the last. The prince, now overweight, thinks that apprentice knights are no longer a match for him. Karl notes that the final challenger is a properly trained knight. He explains this knight left their family style to train seriously within a knighthood. Reading the dossier, the prince finds the opponent is a probationary member of the elite Iron Lion Knights. The challenger is named Arwen Kurdian, who arrives at the castle. Guards confirm the armored woman bearing the Iron Lion emblem is indeed the famous probationary knight. Arwen is introduced as a legendary beauty nicknamed the Flower of the Cliff and Thorny Rose who crushed many men's hearts. She steps into the courtyard, approaching with firm, measured footsteps. Watching her, the guards gush over her beauty and marvel that such a woman came here willingly to duel the prince. Arwen keeps a calm, stern expression as she walks, hiding her thoughts. She steels herself, muttering that in any case she must face this duel. Another onlooker wonders if it would be comical for their prince to be humiliated by this renowned woman. The narration introduces the Iron Lion Knights as one of the kingdom's most famous and skilled orders. It highlights Arwen as an exceptional probation knight whose full membership is already guaranteed. Hearing how talented she is, the prince anxiously wonders why such a genius would come to duel him. Carl hints that there was a past incident between the prince and Arwen, while the prince privately admits he probably started a one-sided fight. The prince calls a maid over and asks her to remind him what he did to Arwen. Nervous, the maid hesitates before addressing him. She finally blurts out that he once harassed Sir Arwen. Horrified at his former self, the reincarnated prince grabs his hair and curses his own past behavior. A flashback shows younger Arwen being grabbed from behind at court. The former prince leers at her, praises her looks by rumor, and suggests she become his personal maid. Arwen coldly brushes off his hand despite his status, refusing to be treated like property. She tells him pointedly that the kingdom's knights are not his personal possessions. Enraged at her defiance, the old prince insults her appearance and erupts in a tantrum. Present day, the new prince listens to this recollection and accepts that this is what he is accused of. He judges the story as the twisted courting attempt of a rotten scoundrel. Looking at Arwen now, he thinks no reasonable person could truly call such a woman ugly. He gazes at Arwen's dignified profile, struck by her beauty and bearing. Arwen greets him formally after a long time, remarking that he seems unchanged. The prince awkwardly replies that he has actually changed completely inside, being a different person than before. Seeing Arwen's cold glare, he resigns himself to facing the consequences of his karma. Count Balarhard arrives with attendants to officiate the duel. The count is surprised when he recognizes Arwen. Arwen respectfully introduces herself to the count as a probation knight of the Iron Lion Knights. The count privately warns Arwen that the prince's sword is dangerous, prompting the prince to complain about his biased remark. The count then moves to begin the proceedings. He orders both combatants to take their positions for the duel. Arwen steps forward, composed and ready to fight. In the courtyard, Balarhard declares that the duel between the prince and Arwen will now begin. At the signal, Arwen rushes toward the prince with swift, low movement and hand on her sword. The prince smiles, eager to test the skill of the Iron Lion Knight's rising star. Arwen explodes forward in a blue-lit leap, launching a powerful overhead strike at him. The prince tracks her approach with glowing eyes and evaluates her movement as respectable. Their blades clash in a burst of blue energy as Arwen presses a fierce attack. The prince feels mana inside him begin to surge and backflow dangerously. Arwen meets his blade with a strong crossguard, matching his empowered blows. The prince grunts while swinging down as Arwen blocks and counters from below. Arwen unleashes a flurry of rapid, precise sword strikes that drive the prince back. She continues her relentless assault, battering his defenses from multiple angles. The prince realizes he is being completely controlled in the fight and decides this situation cannot continue. Arwen gathers mana again, preparing another powerful blue charged slash. In response, the prince activates his unique power Dragon Slayer's Heart, wreathed in red energy. A spectator with red eyes is shocked and alarmed by the sudden manifestation of his power. The prince charges, releasing a crimson wave of force that collides with Arwen. Arwen is driven back through the air by the blast, momentarily overwhelmed. Regaining footing, she pushes herself to sprint back and despite the danger, she notices something strange about the prince's sword and aura. The prince acknowledges that even among single-ring mana users, Arwen is on a much higher level than most. His judgment ability becomes available, allowing him to appraise her status. He reads Arwen's profile, seeing her high combat aptitudes and traits like sword prodigy, competitiveness, and pure heart. Empowered by Dragon Slayer's Heart, the prince stands bloodied but intensely focused. He notes that if he can read all that with only limited authority, it means Arwen's power is still comparable to or below his own. Arwen powers up with blue aura again, refusing to yield. The prince concludes this means she is at most his equal, or slightly weaker, and resolves to go all out. Both combatants surge forward with red and blue energies, declaring the real battle is starting now. Later in the bout, the exhausted prince pants heavily, body covered in bruises. Arwen is also gasping, battered from the prolonged clash. As the sun sets, they face each other in the arena, still standing despite 3 days of fighting. One of their swords falls to the ground as fatigue finally catches up. Count Balarhard calls an end to the day's duel and postpones the conclusion until tomorrow. The prince clicks his tongue, saying he was just about to finish the fight. Arwen smiles faintly, claiming she too was moments from victory. Their mutual competitiveness flares as they suggest continuing the duel as long as the other wishes. Balarhard sternly shouts enough, stopping them from escalating further. He points out that it is late, and orders both fighters to seek healing immediately. A healer rushes to the prince, promising to treat his injuries at once. While healing him, the cleric fusses over additional bruises he finds. The prince watches as another healer tends to Arwen's wounds. Arwen, still quiet, seems uneasy as she glances toward the prince. The two leave the arena in opposite directions without speaking further. As Arwen walks away, she internally vows that she absolutely will not lose this duel. Narration remarks that after days of fighting, no clear winner has yet emerged. Iron Lion Knights gossip that it is already the third day of dueling and they are surprised the prince is holding up. One knight admits Arwen's reputation is deserved but says the first prince's skills are equally impressive. Balarhard hopes the duel will finally produce a result today. Before resuming, the prince tells Arwen he has something to say. Arwen assumes he intends to apologize and warns she will not accept any apology. She adamantly states that no apology can erase what happened before. The prince instead thinks she just wants to reclaim her pride through victory, then says that is not actually his point. He suggests making the duel more interesting by placing a prize on the line. He proposes that the loser must grant one wish to the winner, even kneeling or apologizing if ordered. Arwen stands silently, considering this risky condition. Carl and the others panic, insisting a prince should not offer such stakes, but the prince ignores them. He asks Arwen directly what she thinks of the proposal. Arwen replies formally that as a knight loyal to the Leonberg royal family, she cannot lightly accept a bet that might disrespect him. However, she adds that if the wish remains within what he permits, she is willing to accept the wager. The prince, shrouded in red aura again, praises her decision as sensible. Arwen charges anew, shouting that he must not go back on his word later. The two clash once more in a storm of red and blue slashes. Arwen sends a massive blue energy wave at the prince. The prince's eyes glow red with ferocity as he counters. He drives a devastating red strike straight at Arwen, forcing her to block and cry out. Arwen is shocked by his increased speed and notes he was not this fast the previous day. With Dragon Slayer's heart blazing, the prince appears beneath a vision of a roaring dragon, making observers wonder if he had been hiding his true strength. Red and blue energies collide repeatedly as they trade overwhelming blows. Both fighters are hurled through the air by a massive exchange of power. Arwen takes another heavy hit, grimacing as she tries to keep her guard. She sprints in again while the prince swings a huge red arc that tears up the ground. Gasping, Arwen continues to endure his assault, refusing to fall. The prince presses forward with relentless crimson strikes. Their powers clash once more in a blinding confrontation of red and blue. The shockwave flings swords aside, ending in a decisive exchange. Arwen drops to one knee, badly shaken, while the prince staggers but remains standing. The watching knights are stunned speechless by the outcome. Balerhard stares in surprise at how far the prince has progressed. Arwen, trembling, mutters in disbelief that this result cannot be real. The prince approaches and calmly announces that, under their wager, he has won. Standing before the kneeling Arwen, he begins to declare his wish. He looks down with a faint, resolved smile. Arwen hears him state that what he wants is her. Narration shifts to Carl, who says being royal guard to the infamous first prince seemed easier than expected. In an earlier memory, Carl first introduced himself to the prince and pledged to serve him. Carl recalls that although the prince appeared arrogant, he did not behave as violently as court rumors claimed. Carl later watches the prince training alone, swinging a sword in the courtyard. Contrary to rumors, Carl begins to doubt his earlier negative impression of the prince. One rainy night, he and other knights quietly observe the prince obsessively training in the downpour. A subordinate suggests stopping the prince because the rain is too heavy. Carl moves to intervene, shouting for the prince to be careful. At that moment, the prince's strike explodes with golden power against the wooden dummy. Carl watches in awe as the drenched prince smiles through the sparks. The sight convinces Carl, shown by his widened eye, that the prince is extraordinary. Carl narrates that from then on he felt the prince was destined to become a great man. Returning to the present duel, Carl admits he used to think that way as the prince tells Arwen he wants her. The onlooking knights reel at the seemingly scandalous confession. Carl wonders if he misjudged the prince's intentions after all. Exhausted, Arwen steadies herself and questions if his demand is truly what he desires. She shouts, asking if that bold wish is really what the prince wants from her. The prince answers that in her current state she is just an apprentice who cannot defeat even a scoundrel prince. He explains that what he actually wants as his prize is something else. He clarifies that he seeks Arwen Kurgien's potential and future as a knight. He says he needs a knight who chooses to follow him of their own will. He emphasizes he does not want someone bound only by royal decree. Instead, he desires a knight who belongs solely to him and believes Arwen fits that role. Drawing on his judgment readout, he tells her she possesses remarkable talent with the sword. Therefore, he concludes, Arwen Kurgien is exactly the person he wants. He formally asks her to become his knight as the sun sets behind her. Arwen narrates that she did become the knight she dreamed of, serving that childlike prince, as her new life by his side begins. Observers note that Arwen matches the rumors about her beauty. Arwen recalls that because no one recognized her as a true knight, she trained twice as hard as the others. During training, Arwen dominates a duel, forcing an opponent to the ground at sword point. The bout ends with Arwen Kurgien declared the victor, even after Arwen defeats all fellow apprentices with overwhelming sword skill. She continues clashing blades fiercely with yet another opponent in the yard. Arwen showcases outstanding results in repeated sparring matches. Despite her prowess, other knights treat her as a poster girl and say escorting such a beauty is an honor, making her feel she still is not seen as a knight. Remembering this, Arwen hesitates, struggling with her emotions. She reflects on a proposal that values her knightly potential and future. Arwen wonders if the prince offering this is truly sincere. In the training grounds at sunset, she begins to make a solemn request of him. Arwen asks the prince to treat her not as a woman but purely as a knight. She adds that if he does so, she will comply with his wishes. The prince silently considers her earnest demand. Arwen watches him tensely, awaiting his response. He agrees and promises to honor her as a knight. Arwen steps forward to formally kneel before him. She drops to one knee in front of the prince to pledge herself. Arwen, eldest daughter of the Kurgan family, begins swearing loyalty to Prince Adrian Leonberg. She vows to dedicate her sword and entire life in his service, astonishing the watching knights. A stern black-armored commander looks on in speechless surprise. Adrian, invoking his status as legitimate heir of Leonberg, officially knights Arwen. As Arwen kneels, he pronounces the virtues she must uphold as a knight. He finishes the ceremony by commanding her to remain brave, courteous, and loyal. Later at the academy grounds, Arwen's swift movement catches students' attention. Some apprentices gossip that swearing loyalty to that scoundrel prince is senseless, and say they should somehow void the oath, though she refused their help. Others whisper suspiciously, wondering if Arwen and the prince have some hidden relationship. More rumors spread that Adrian might be using a knight's oath as cover to keep her as a mistress, questioning why she accepted his duel. Adrian, hearing how people now talk about him, explodes in frustration, asking if he is some villain. He rants that everyone treats him like the worst scum alive. His knight Carl listens in uneasy silence. Carl then addresses Adrian to revisit something the prince said earlier. He brings up Adrian's past remark made on the day of the final duel, which Adrian initially does not remember. Carl clarifies he means Adrian's wish for a knight who serves him from personal will, not by royal decree, reminding Adrian of that conversation. Carl asks if that truth offended him, pointing out that a knight bound by decree would leave if ordered elsewhere. Adrian casually says Carl may swear his oath later if he wants. Carl gathers courage and asks if Adrian would really accept his own oath. Adrian turns away and bluntly refuses. He coldly says Carl brings him no joy to raise and he does not want him. Carl laughs it off, masking hurt, and Adrian reacts with mild annoyance. Adrian insists he is serious, not joking, about his rejection. Soon after, Adrian receives a royal decree releasing him from probation to attend an upcoming banquet, wondering if he caused this. Scratching his head, he's puzzled that probation ended a month and a half early. He recalls how the king once seemed ready to shut him away in the first prince's palace forever, making this sudden change suspicious. Walking through the palace, Adrian mutters that he cannot guess the king's intentions, while a maid asks if he is glad probation is over. Adrian replies that he does not really care, since leaving the palace offers him nowhere to go. He adds that he has no acquaintances to visit, startling the maid as she reads something. She nervously apologizes, explaining she just noticed an invitation addressed to him. Adrian repeats in surprise that he has received an invitation. The maid shows him a fancy card, confirming that this is the letter. Reading it, Adrian learns it is for a social club reserved for select young lords. The maid explains it is a gathering he himself once belonged to, shocking him. Adrian asks if the place is strange, prompting the maid to hesitate. She recalls it as a decadent den where young nobles drink heavily and indulge in refined but incomprehensible pleasures with women. Adrian concludes it is just a club for drinking and chasing women and says he'd rather focus on training than attend such a useless event. As he is about to dismiss it, something on the envelope catches his attention. He reads the flowery dedication from his supposed eternal friend Bernardo of the Eli family. Seeing the Eli name, Adrian is startled and repeats it aloud. He remembers from his uncle's stories that House Eli once stubbornly upheld the Manna heart tradition until the end, only to fall into ruin a century ago. Because of this, Adrian changes his mind and decides he should attend the gathering after all, and the maid agrees to prepare his things. He hopes the Eli family has not yet completely fallen from grace as he folds the invitation. Narration notes that 4 months have passed since Adrian possessed the body of the scoundrel first prince and began harsh weight loss training, while a tailor excitedly presents new clothes made to his instructions. Adrian's new outfit is black, matching his preference. The clothes have minimal decoration, just as he requested. The design is simple yet, according to the tailor, still preserves his princely dignity. Looking in the mirror, Adrian acknowledges he has lost a lot of weight, and the tailor marvels that his measurements have more than halved. Adrian entrusts the future palace banquet attire to the tailor as well, who wants to start immediately, but Adrian tells him to wait since his body will change further. Smiling confidently, he predicts his measurements will shrink even more before the banquet. A few days after probation ends, Adrian rides by carriage toward the hated social club for special young lords. Carl rides as escort, watchful beside the royal carriage. Inside the carriage, Adrian yawns and complains that being a prince is exhausting. He grumbles that the formal clothes, carriage, and escorts make everything feel suffocating. Mid-complaint, he notices something off with his maid. He sees a glimpse of a scar on Adelia's shoulder and calls out to her. Adrian directly asks about the scar on her neck. Adelia answers that it was caused by her own incompetence during a previous reprimand from him and accepts blame. Adrian imagines the former prince's cruel past abuses, horrified by how many awful stories keep surfacing. Watching the frightened maid, he realizes he has never even learned her name despite months together. He asks her name at last, startling her. She introduces herself as Adelia Bayern, causing him to react sharply. Hearing the Bayern name, Adrian recalls it belongs to a nearly forgotten noble family. He internally marvels that he's hearing that name again, and narration shifts to a distant past before cities or kingdoms existed. The story describes the many races on the continent, showing dwarves and orcs amid war. It was an age when weak humans were naturally robbed and slaughtered by stronger species. Some heroes arose and ended that era of human misery at the climax of a great war. Those saviors who made humans the continent's dominant race came to be called the Five Electors. One of these 5 legendary heroes steps forward in the tale. The red-haired swordswoman is named Grihorn. She stands amid blazing skies and challenges an unseen interlocutor to consider what comes after the war. Facing a horde of monstrous giants, she muses about what she and her comrade will do once the fighting ends. A close-up of her fierce eyes underscores her resolve. She then launches into the fray, leaping at the colossal enemy. She beheads Ida, the king of giants, ending the giant's centuries of exploitation of humankind. The scene shows her finishing blow cleaving the giant's body apart. Narration identifies her fully as Agnes Byrne, the iron-blooded sword marquis. Agnes smirks amid the carnage, her scarred face framed by flying hair. On a battlefield strewn with giant corpses, more foes charge her. Her eyes blaze with fury as she prepares another outburst. Agnes furiously berates the giants for crawling back in search of prey and curses them as depraved gluttons. She continues yelling vile insults at them as she hacks through their ranks. Her tirade escalates into heavily censored profanities about what should be done to monsters like them. The sword's gem flashes as if sensing her rage, drowning her remaining curses in noise. Adrian snaps out of the recollection, disgusted that merely remembering her vulgar language makes his ears feel dirty. He refocuses on Adelia and internally wonders how a descendant of such a famed Byrne ended up like her. Looking at the timid maid, he is baffled by how her once glorious lineage could decline so far. Carl informs Adrian that their carriage has arrived at the destination. Carl peers in from outside, addressing the prince again. Adrian steps out, saying Carl's timing is perfect. The prince strides away from the carriage toward the club entrance. He tells a confused Adelia they will talk later, leaving her standing there bewildered. Adelia watches them go, surrounded by question marks, unsure what just happened. At the entrance, a silver-haired young noble joyfully calls out to Adrian, introducing himself formally. Bernardo of the Eli family greets Prince Adrian and asks if he has been well. Bernardo effusively says he is overjoyed Adrian is safe, while Adrian skeptically thinks this supposed Eli heir just looks like a punk. Bernardo remarks that Adrian must have suffered greatly to become so thin, prompting a thoughtful look from the prince. Adrian lets out a dark chuckle, unsettling Bernardo, who asks if he is all right. Adrian brushes it off, saying his body is fine and that coming today might actually be a good thing. With a sly smile, he pats Bernardo's shoulder and says the day will be very entertaining thanks to him. Bernardo, feeling a chill, stares in confusion at Adrian's ominous reaction. Inside the club, other young nobles share lewd stories about women, laughing loudly. Men flirt openly with courtesans, commenting on their soft skin while the women feign playful protest. The camera widens to show the lavish salon where nobles drink and revel around a table piled with food and alcohol, Adrian and Bernardo among them. Bernardo privately notes that Adrian's behavior tonight is strange compared to his usual drunken, womanizing self. He observes that Adrian's aura now feels completely different from before as the prince calmly nurses a drink. The calm breaks when another noble stands and approaches Adrian. This smug noble begins addressing Adrian with a conspiratorial smile. He says everyone is talking about how Adrian supposedly claimed the famed Iron Lion's flower, meaning Arwen. Adrian listens in silence, not responding at first. Other nobles complain that they were too slow, saying they had also coveted Arwen and wished they had secured her oath first. One man lewdly imagines how Arwen's body must look beneath her armor, calling her beautiful and wondering about her flesh. Adrian interrupts him and abruptly asks whether the man has any sisters at home, startling him. When the man hesitantly answers, Adrian reminds him that he himself has a younger brother and says that is fortunate. Before the lecher can process it, Adrian suddenly moves, his fist flashing toward the man's face. He slams the noble with a brutal punch. The blow sends the man reeling and screaming as blood flies. He crashes to the floor, shattering his glass and soaking the carpet with spilled wine. The other nobles and women stare in shock at the sudden violence. Bernardo is horrified and speechless at Adrian's outburst. Adrian coldly remarks that it is fortunate the man's family line will continue, implying his target will not be able to father children after this. He then savagely kicks the man in the groin with explosive force. Everyone in the room freezes as the prince stands over the writhing noble. Adrian's mind flashes back to the day the king stripped him of succession in favor of his younger brother, fueling his rage. Drawing down that anger, he raises his fist again. He lands another heavy punch squarely on the man's face. Onlookers wince and recoil at the relentless beating. Bernardo and others try to intervene but are too late to stop the assault. Adrian grabs the man by the collar to keep him upright. The battered noble, terrified and bleeding, demands to know why the prince is doing this to him. Adrian leans in close and tells him to listen carefully, preparing to explain exactly why he is being punished. The prince insists he will not accept being treated like a scoundrel even if others think of him that way. The onlookers are completely baffled by his sudden declaration. He explains that his words mean the noble he is beating still has not been hit enough and continues pummeling him. The beaten noble crashes across the room as the prince finishes his attack. Everyone watches in shock while the prince stands over the aftermath. The noble lies bruised and barely conscious on the floor. The prince calls Eli, who hurriedly responds in fear and submission. Smirking, the prince says he already knew this day would be entertaining. Eli internally panics, unable to understand why the prince is acting so violently. The prince orders Eli to summon the royal knights. Eli loudly affirms that he will obey the prince's command and runs off. The gathering hall falls into uneasy silence as the prince waits in the center with the beaten noble at his feet. The prince calmly stands with blood on his face, collecting himself. He orders the women present to leave the room. One nobleman hesitates, clearly uncomfortable with the situation. Nervous, he begins edging toward the exit. The prince icily reminds him that only the women were told to go. The prince warns that any man who leaves now will only do so after being turned into a woman. The nobles recoil in terror as they imagine the prince's brutality. Surrounded by frightened noble youths, the prince holds their attention with a casual menace. He steps forward, ready to press the matter further. He recalls how these nobles previously failed to show basic respect and never even knelt before him. He remembers one of them openly mocking him to his face. He adds that they also dared to insult his personal knight. Turning to the arriving knights, the prince asks what crimes can be laid on such behavior. As armored royal knights enter, someone notes that looking down on royalty is itself a punishable offense. They explain that such actions count as an insult to the royal family. The knight commander further declares that challenging royal authority amounts to treason. The knights ask the prince whom he wishes them to force to their knees. The prince smiles wickedly, delighted by the opportunity. He orders that everyone present be made to kneel. Later, the prince is summoned before the throne and told he has caused a major incident right after his probation ended. The king angrily lists that 14 noble children have been arrested under charges like insulting royalty and treason. The king demands if the prince understands the gravity of what he has done. He says the nobles must be punished for defying royal authority, but warns that angering 14 families will have serious repercussions. The prince calmly asks if the king is mainly afraid of political backlash. He argues that the arrested youths are useless embarrassments whom their own families barely tolerate. The prince suggests sending letters to resolve the issue. When the king asks to whom, the prince points out that each family already has someone best suited to handle its internal problems. He clarifies that he means the brothers and sisters of the arrested scoundrels. He challenges the king to say if that reasoning is wrong. The king finally dismisses him, and the prince leaves satisfied that his father had no rebuttal. Later, the prince greets a nervous maid kindly, assuring her he will not hurt her. Terrified, the maid asks what she has done wrong to be summoned by him. Seeing her trembling, the prince realizes the former scoundrel version of himself must have tormented her a lot. He recalls that her impoverished noble family barely holds its title. Narration reveals that even her own bloodline forgot the lost glory of the Bayern name as its heroic history was erased. Their unmatched martial arts were severed and forgotten as well. The prince reflects on the prestige and pride that vanished with that lineage. An appraisal window reveals that the maid, Adelia Bayern, has top-tier aptitude in swordsmanship and mana along with extreme traits: butcher, war maniac, fragile heart, caregiver, and slave mentality. Shocked, the prince mentally tells himself to wait and reassess what he is seeing. He fixates on how contradictory and dangerous those traits are. Explanations show that her violent traits make her bloodthirsty and battle-obsessed even as she remains kind and tender. Other notes add that she is naturally nurturing yet psychologically dependent and submissive. The prince realizes she has unparalleled combat talent but no trait to restrain the madness that will come with it. He wonders whether unleashing such an unstable powerhouse on the world is truly wise. After agonizing over it, he decides he has to at least try. He steels himself, accepting the challenge of managing her power. He reasons that S-rank sword talent is too valuable to waste and notes that one particular trait could be used to his advantage. The narrative defines slave mentality as a trait where one finds joy in serving a powerful master wholeheartedly. The prince addresses Adelia by name and commands her to swear loyalty to him. Confused, she stammers, asking what he means. He bluntly tells her to become his knight and swear the oath immediately. Overwhelmed, she insists someone as lowly as her cannot possibly fill such a role. He recalls her saying her family was insignificant, then promises to take responsibility for them. In exchange, he demands that she swear loyalty and acknowledge him as her master. He tells her that if she cannot control her inner madness, he will take control of it for her. She asks if he truly will look after her family, and he affirms it. He even offers to bring her relatives to the capital so she can see them, which moves her to accept. Adelia, eldest daughter of House Bayern, formally pledges her loyalty to Prince Adrian Leonberg. She vows to serve him as her master and dedicate her entire life to him. The prince accepts with a simple approval as he reaches out to her. Placing his hand on her head, he declares that she must now obey his every order without question, and she agrees. As he maintains the ritual gesture, she blushes and clutches her hands in devout earnestness. Watching her reaction, the prince privately wonders if recruiting her this way was really the right decision. Rumors spread that the first prince has resumed his scoundrel ways by coercing a knight's oath through underhanded means. The gossip continues that he summoned, beat, and imprisoned noble children as well. People also claim he is turning a maid who has never wielded a sword into his personal knight, assuming he wants a harem. Hearing all this attention, the prince grumbles about when everyone became so interested in him. He complains to his knight commander that taking in just one personal knight has caused endless comments. The king scolds him for creating political trouble while seeming to indulge in women. Another elder brands his behavior pathetic and accuses him of abandoning an important bet. A royal brother mocks him for appointing a maid as a knight, saying it is just like him. The prince laments how fast rumors spread through the court. When told the queen has arrived, he reacts in exasperation. The queen rebukes him for appearing to relapse into his old habits just as he seemed reformed. Then she remarks that his situation actually suits her plans. She says that once a spouse is chosen for him, he will surely stop wandering and settle down. She enthusiastically promises to personally find him a suitable bride and orders him to trust her. As she leaves, the prince sits there speechless, thinking he no longer understands what is happening. Later, Adelia nervously asks if becoming a knight means she will now obtain mana. The prince confirms and says he will grant her a very special type of mana. He begins channeling blue energy, preparing the ritual. As golden power surges around Adelia, he recalls the forgotten legacy of the Sword Marquis and remembers every detail of those techniques. He remembers the fiery footsteps that legend left behind. He recalls the way her sword once danced effortlessly at her fingertips. He envisions the golden figure of that master placing hands on Adelia as if passing on her legacy. The image focuses on the serene, golden-haired master bestowing power upon Adelia. That power crystallizes into the resounding formation of a mana heart within her chest. A system notice confirms that Adelia Byron has successfully sensed mana. More messages state that the prince has imprinted mana onto her, and that it has fully settled within her body. Another notification declares that a mana heart has been created inside her. Adelia looks at the energy surrounding her in awe, realizing that this glowing force is mana. The prince tells her that what she just did is the method for forging a mana heart, and instructs her to practice it regularly. Exhausted from the effort, he collapses forward as she cries out in alarm. Panting, he admits to himself that forming even one mana heart has left him drained. He brushes it off as mere fatigue while she wonders why he would go so far for someone as lowly as her. He curtly tells her it is fine and that she can leave for now. Noticing her lingering gaze, he awkwardly asks why she keeps looking at him that way. Overcome, she bows deeply and vows to serve him with unwavering loyalty for the rest of her life. He smiles and reminds her not to forget that he is her master. She eagerly agrees, repeating her affirmation. As he walks away, he privately admits he is worried that she might one day forget that hierarchy. Seeing her stare at him with shining, almost fanatical eyes, he realizes that concern might be justified. A few days later, his knight commander brings up the matter of Bernardo Eli. The commander explains that Eli is being held by the royal guard as a key witness, and that no one may see him until the upcoming trial. The prince, dismayed, asks if he must attend the trial, but is reminded that royalty never stands trial. Relieved, he calls that good news. He still thinks holding a full trial is an overreaction to the incident. He turns to Adelia and casually checks how she is doing, startling her. He specifically asks whether her mana heart has stabilized, and she confirms that it has. Satisfied, he announces that from now on she will participate in his training. He orders her to change clothes and meet him at the training grounds. He adds that she should put down her cleaning rag, since she is a knight now, not merely a maid. Out on the practice field, the prince begins his own warm-up exercises. As he stretches, he questions what his stern instructor is doing there. The instructor snaps that he is not talking about the prince but about someone else nearby. We see Adelia in armor running laps around the yard as the instructor indicates her. The prince casually replies that he is indeed making her a knight, just like the rumors say. The instructor explodes, asking if the title of knight means so little to him. He continues scolding the prince for acting reckless in such a tense political climate, while the prince complains about his meddling. The prince retorts that if the instructor hates this idea so much, why does he keep coming to watch training? Adelia staggers up and reports that she has completed 10 exhausting laps. The prince and instructor glance at her condition, evaluating her effort. Apologizing, she blames herself for causing trouble, but the prince brushes it aside and tosses her a practice sword. He tells her that for today he will only teach her the basic stance. Demonstrating, he takes the stance and shows her how to swing correctly. He then tells her to try imitating what she just saw. Nervously gripping the wooden sword, she asks if standing like this is right. Her eyes suddenly sharpen as something awakens within her. She explodes into motion, reproducing the prince's powerful swing with surprising force and precision. The instructor is stunned by the display. The prince, equally shocked, realizes she copied his demonstration nearly perfectly after seeing it only once. When she asks if her stance was correct, he internally pauses to process what this implies. He concludes that if he lets his guard down, this girl will overtake his skill in no time. He reflects uneasily that her slave mentality makes her obey strength, and remembers how the former scoundrel prince tormented her before. Imagining a future where she surpasses him, he pictures her menacingly pointing a sword at him. Snapped back to reality, he reacts with a wary The instructor, now impressed, marvels aloud at the depth of talent she clearly possesses. Alarmed by that appraisal, the prince demands to know what the instructor thinks he is planning to do. The blonde youth furiously warns the man not to desire the girl. The dark-haired knight mocks him, asking what he could possibly provide the child. The knight belittles him as a rookie swordsman of only a few months. Surrounded by blue mana, the knight insists the boy is incapable of handling her. The youth is engulfed by the same mana, bracing himself instead of collapsing. He reflects that the former scoundrel would have already fled in fear. Rejecting that past self, he decides that if he truly cannot handle her, his mana erupts into a massive swirling blue flame. He resolves that if even he cannot handle her, then no one can, beginning a declaration. He proclaims he has drunk the blood of the giant king, the mad dragon, and many others. The cursed sword Grohorn is revealed as the vessel of those powers. A system-like notice explains that a fragment of Grohorn's soul manifests to his will. His eyes turn red as that soul fragment starts to overlay him. The knight watches tensely while red mana flares around the youth. Wreathed in crimson aura, the youth begins to declare what she is to him. Possessed and obsessive, he roars that the girl belongs to him. Facing the knight, he repeats that she is his alone and must not be looked at or coveted. Calmer but still fierce, he says he hates anyone taking what he considers his. The knight stands troubled, with the armored girl behind him, after this confrontation. A close-up of the youth's slit red eye shows the possession starting to fade. As he cools down, he feels his grasp on reality slipping. He describes lying underwater, unable to sense vitality or life. Numb in the dark cold, he wonders if this state is some kind of omen. He realizes that at this rate, his frail body will be devoured by Grohorn's soul. Terrified, he struggles as spectral hands close in around him. A commanding voice declares that this is enough and halts the devouring. He reaches out with blue energy to seize and suppress the invading soul. Back in the courtyard, he stands with controlled blue mana as the knight approaches. He recalls the saying that even a normal knight can save 10 soldiers. The The knight counters that one outstanding knight can save 100 soldiers. He adds that the girl might someday save 1,000 or more. The youth ponders the knight's conviction and motives. He questions whether this is truly a great cause for a northern commander. He bluntly tells his uncle he does not care about that cause. The uncle protests, asking if that holds even if she could save countless people. The girl refuses the uncle, saying her body and heart already belong to the prince. Shocked into silence, the uncle has no rebuttal. The youth thinks dragging out his soul was worth it since her slave mentality yields to a higher being, and repeats her declaration. He jokes that the uncle's training goal was only weight loss and asks if there is anything left to teach. He tells the uncle that continued visits to the palace are fine only if he stops meddling in his affairs. Reluctantly, the uncle agrees to back off. Narration explains that despite this, the uncle keeps visiting to quietly watch over Adelia's training. The youth finds it amusing to see his once overbearing uncle squirm under the no-nagging rule. During practice, Adelia's wooden sword suddenly glows with golden energy, surprising him. She stands awestruck as golden aura blazes around her blade. The uncle recognizes the phenomenon with shock. The youth wonders if she has already grasped sword resonance. He claps enthusiastically and cheerfully praises her performance. She pants but is thrilled by her rapid growth, thinking she might even surpass him. The uncle demands to know if the youth also taught her the secret of the mana heart. The youth casually answers that he did and asks if that is a problem. The uncle erupts, calling the technique a cheap trick the youth never should have spread. The youth falls silent, clearly annoyed by the insult. He curtly orders the uncle to leave. The uncle laments that there was a far better path and more potential, accusing the youth of ruining everything. The prince orders Karl to escort the uncle out of the palace. The uncle says he will leave by himself and walks away. The others watch as he departs across the training ground. Adelia anxiously asks if the mana heart she learned is really just a cheap trick. The youth firmly assures her it absolutely is not. She asks why the count spoke that way, and he answers that the man simply does not know. He reflects that people of this era have forgotten what a true mana heart is. He reasons that if they remembered, they would not have discarded the technique like trash. He tells Adelia she will soon witness the real power of the mana heart. Lightning-like mana tears up the ground as he demonstrates. He stands with arms crossed, calmly radiating that power. The uncle, having returned, challenges him to prove himself despite having vowed not to come back. The uncle declares he will fight using only one mana ring and will acknowledge the youth if pushed back even half a step. The youth grips the wooden sword and asks to confirm the terms of their old bet. He remembers that the prize was granting any wish the victor desired. The uncle reiterates that if the boy wins he will grant any request, even teaching the family's secret art. The youth says the secret technique is not what he truly wants but accepts those terms for now. He lunges forward, shouting his challenge as their duel begins in earnest. The uncle grins that the boy still aims straight for the throat from the outset. He remarks that the youth's sword is as venomous as ever while parrying. Their weapons clash repeatedly in blurs of motion. The youth presses in, eyes blazing with focus. A rapid exchange shatters the wooden blades as they collide. One of the swords is flung spinning into the air. The youth follows through with another fierce strike at close range. The uncle easily blocks and taunts him, asking if that is all he has. The youth strains against the lock, realizing the gap in power. Knocked back, he slides and stabilizes himself on the ground. The uncle asks if he has already given up. The youth scoffs that he would never, admitting internally that his uncle's strength is undeniable. He acknowledges that his powerful uncle is provoking him to draw out more mana for an even harsher defeat. He concludes that with his current mana heart level he really would lose exactly as expected. Smiling, he asks his uncle if the situation does not seem strange. The uncle is puzzled as the youth begins a lesson from 400 years ago. He recalls how countless mana heart knights once battled monsters like dragons and giant kings. Those knights accomplished miraculous feats with their power. Yet after one convenient new technique appeared, the old knightly arts were dismissed as useless. People came to believe mana chain was a far stronger manipulation method than the mana heart. The uncle asks what he is getting at, and the youth says his view is different. He argues it was not the mana heart that was weak but its later wielders, since hearts can differ vastly. He then asks his uncle if he has ever heard of a record called Martial Spirit Hymn. The uncle brushes it off, insisting this is a place for fighting, not fanciful talk. The youth expected this dismissal, remembering how the uncle had called mana hearts crude mercenary tricks. He points out that insult while the uncle retorts the boy talks too much. When the uncle asks if he needs time to rest, the youth coldly refuses. Narration states that a knight's walked path becomes an achievement. The youth focuses, declaring that his 100 victories are both his pride and his power. The uncle, hearing the words of the hymn, reacts in shock as the narration names the specific achievement. The hymn explains that achievements are engraved into the heart and become a martial spirit hymn. A message announces that such a martial spirit hymn has just been created through his struggle. Another notice specifies that a common rank hymn of sparring now dwells in his sword. He grins as the same hymn of sparring activates, born of his half-year of relentless effort. He proclaims that what follows is the true power of the mana heart. The technique's formal name appears as Martial Spirit Hymn. The hymn of sparring's effect is confirmed as active as vast blue aura surges around him. The uncle still maintains that anyone with a mana heart cannot beat mana chain. The youth charges again, wrapped in reinforced blue flames. They meet head-on in another explosive clash of blades and mana. Narration concedes that ring mana does cause dangerous backflow through the mana heart. The youth grimaces as that backflow batters his body. The uncle smirks, believing he still holds the advantage. He praises the youth's tenacity in enduring so long under that pressure. However, the youth notes to himself that, To earn this hymn he sparred over 100 times and endured ring mana more than 1,000 times. The hymn is described as a power specifically forged to combat ring knights. He recounts that while clashing 100 times, he withstood 1,000 mana waves. His power peaks as blue light pours from him. He announces that what they see now is the might granted by the hymn of sparring. His blade extends in pure blue energy, ready to strike. Seeing that manifestation, the uncle finally considers the duel worth taking seriously. A blinding explosion erupts where their powers collide. In the shockwave, the uncle is struck directly by the empowered blow. The youth continues an unrelenting barrage of blue-lit attacks. He drives in with a fierce overhead strike, eyes blazing with confidence. The uncle, battered, is astonished that the boy has lasted this long. His own wooden practice sword cracks under the strain. He counters with a powerful mana slash of his own. The youth tenses and prepares to meet that incoming attack. Hurt but still standing, he grips his sword, aura flaring. The uncle, shaken, wonders how this can be, while the youth reminds him of his earlier words. The uncle's aura swells as he accuses the boy of arrogance, and insists not all mana hearts are equal. He lunges forward, feet smashing the ground. Their blades collide yet again in a massive vertical beam of light. The resulting blast sends the uncle crashing into a distant wall. Rising from the rubble, the uncle says he will stop toying with him, conceding that lasting this long is impressive. As dust swirls, the youth admits that a mere common-grade martial spirit hymn is not enough. Kneeling but defiant, he begins another explanation that reaches back 400 years. He states that back then the knights made a fatal mistake. A vision shows ancient knights who eradicated their monstrous foes so thoroughly they left none for their descendants. He reflects that at first the full legacy of sword arts, heart refinement, and martial spirit hymns was inherited intact. But over time those brilliant achievements decayed and were forgotten. Stories of unseen dragons and unknown giant kings degraded into unbelievable myths. Those once real foes became silly legends in the eyes of later generations. He concludes that new hymns were still created but only from modest human-level achievements, making modern martial spirit hymns weak shadows of the originals. The narrator explains that weapons which never reached the level of myth or hero cannot endure the new power now raging. Ian dismisses the technique mana chain as too weak to reach true transcendence. His sparring partner, confused, asks if Ian is drunk because he cannot follow Ian's strange remarks. Vale Ballarhard glares at Ian and internally calls him an arrogant and foolish knight. Ian declares that everyone needs to understand what a great power they have just lost. A terrifying red aura surges forth, forming a monstrous presence. Ian is engulfed by a colossal demonic figure as the narrator warns what happens if they do not understand. He vows to demonstrate personally, as the red spirit coils around his wooden sword. The hymn's voice boasts that this power can cut what no treasured blade can and even split a dragon's scales. Ian, eyes glowing red, completes the thought that it can also drink a dragon's blood. He begins chanting the martial spirit skill hymn of true dragon slaying. The system warns that his current abilities are insufficient for the hymn's high grade, causing him agonizing backlash. Most of the hymn is forcibly omitted, leaving Ian able to sing only a tiny fragment. Even that fragment, splitting the dragon's scales, unleashes a devastating vertical slash. Ian charges with bloodshot eyes, swinging the empowered wooden sword. Vale meets the attack with four-ring aura, and their blows collide violently. Shocked, Vale realizes the strange power clashing with his aura. He panics, thinking that if this continues he will be overwhelmed and metaphorically devoured. Their conflicting energies compress into a blinding blue sphere. The clash erupts in a huge explosion that shatters the training ground. Ian is blasted away and crashes, while someone cries out to the prince. Smoke clears to reveal Vale still standing amid the swirling dust. Ian lies injured on the ground, silently assessing the situation. He complains that Vale used more than the single aura ring he had promised. Vale reflects that despite using all 4 of his aura rings, he still could not stop his wooden sword from being cut in half by Ian's attack. Ian, exhausted, forces himself to sit up after the duel. The narration reiterates the accepted truth that mana drawn from the heart is weaker than mana from aura rings. Ian formally addresses Count Vale Ballarhard. He bluntly tells Vale that Vale lost the match. A memory shows a monstrous dragon-like foe snarling in battle. The scene shifts to that beast being skewered and torn apart by multiple blades. Then the narration rejects something with a firm no. A gleaming sword is shown as the command to stop is given. Ian, sweating, pleads inwardly for that brutal memory to end. Startled awake, he clutches his chest as power flickers. He tumbles onto his bed, shaking from the aftereffects. His hand grips the sheets, showing how rattled he is. Cursing the martial spirit hymn, he complains about what it put his body through. He recalls that the steep price for forcefully drawing out the hymn's power was using the skill splitting the dragon's scales. Since that hymn is tied to a myth-level being, invoking it strains him far beyond normal limits. Even though his body is wrecked, he thinks the gain was worth the risk. He proudly activates his first self-made martial spirit hymn, describing it as forged from 100 victories that became his pride and strength. He remembers enduring countless duels and waves of attacks, which this new blue hymn encapsulates. He vows to stand firm before even greater trials as the grade of his hymn of sparring increases slightly. Concluding this is enough preparation for sparring with the third prince, he muses while his maid calls to him. The maid rushes in joyfully, relieved that he has finally regained consciousness. She explains that his collapse caused chaos and that the queen became angrier than she has ever seen. Ian smugly thinks those people deserved it, while the maid adds that Count Ballarhard left a message. She says the count asked to be informed as soon as Ian awakened. Ian tells her not to report it yet because he intends to rest a bit longer. A sharp pain or twinge reminds him his condition is still unstable. He reflects that if he does not properly heal the spirit damaged by overusing the martial hymn, he will face a terrible consequence. His memories warn that reality and past experiences could blend until the boundary of reality collapses. In that nightmare vision, he would go mad, endlessly reenacting battles as a martial spirit inside a broken world. Thinking of being trapped again in a sword's memories after finally becoming human makes him shudder. He recalls Agnes Byrne, a legendary swordswoman wreathed in flames. Ian tells his maid that as a descendant of Byrne, she should be able to inherit the martial spirit hymn left by that ancestor. She is stunned to learn her forebear was such a great swordswoman. Ian cautions that she must grow far stronger before she can handle a hymn of that caliber, then prepares to address another matter. He asks her what she hopes to achieve by learning the sword. Nervous, she tries to explain her motivation. She says that if she could truly become a knight, she blurts out that if she becomes a knight then something important will follow, but cannot quite voice it. Ian tells her she can answer later if she cannot decide now, prompting her to promise she will. As she turns away, Ian watches her curiously, wondering what she is thinking. Gathering courage, she declares that she will become his sword and devote herself to him. Ian is taken aback by her sudden oath. The narration explains that some martial deeds hymns begin like a battle trumpet. Others start with the blare of a charge across a battlefield filled with soldiers. Still others begin with a single first step across a plain, founded on a heartfelt oath. Adelia's vow to live entirely for Ian and dedicate everything to him ignites golden flames around her. The system announces that Adelia Byrne has offered the hymn of subordination, and Ian recognizes it as her martial spirit hymn. The golden power flows into his chest as their bond is forged. The narrator notes that martial spirit hymns can influence others, and a new hymn has been created through this interaction. Ian learns he has gained a new normal-grade martial spirit hymn called Hymn of Domination and reacts in surprise. The explanation clarifies that the Hymn of Subordination is an oath that binds servant and master souls rather than a standard combat hymn, even if Adelia has a slave mentality trait. Ian privately marvels that a descendant of the famed sword marquis would create such a hymn. He concludes he has received much-needed help from an unexpected source. Smiling, he realizes that as long as he is the target of the Hymn of Subordination, Adelia's future growth through this hymn will also empower him. He thanks her sincerely for dedicating herself to him. Flustered, she softly repeats his title, overwhelmed. Ian muses that although he does not yet know what form this benefit will take, it will surely aid him. Some days later, time passes and life in the royal castle resumes. Ian, now in formal attire, sits on a throne-like chair looking slightly tense. A knight and Adelia stand before him, momentarily speechless. The queen asks if his body has recovered, while a note clarifies Ian is Adrian's nickname, and he answers that he is fine. Ian thinks privately that dealing with people who dislike him is easy, but facing someone like the queen, who deeply loved the body's original owner, feels awkward. She gently asks whether he resents his uncle Vale. She insists Vale never meant to harm him and urges Ian to let go of any grudges, while he replies that he holds none. Overcome, she insists he must resent Vale for nagging and rough treatment, assuming Ian is lying. Ian reiterates that he truly does not resent his uncle. He reflects that he already struck a critical blow to Vale's pride and beliefs during their duel, planting a painful inner struggle. That planted trauma is described as an inner demon that now torments Vale. Ian thinks that if Vale can overcome this trial he will grow, but if not he will lose his martial edge, and Ian frankly does not care which happens. The queen explains that Vale spent his life closer to the sword than people, so he is rough, but lately he seemed proud of Ian. She recounts how Vale even persuaded the king personally on Ian's behalf. Ian learns that thanks to Vale's intervention his probation ended earlier than planned. However, as soon as it ended Ian caused more trouble, putting Vale in a difficult position. Ian starts to reconsider things, thinking but, as he weighs this new information, he wonders why a man like Vale would go that far for him. At that moment the old scholar Niccolo Marchiadel appears, greeting him respectfully. When Niccolo announces he is here to tutor him, Ian flatly refuses. The knight and Adelia watch, unsure how to react to Ian's blunt rejection. Ian protests loudly about having to study, while Niccolo retorts that without learning there is no difference between a human and a beast. Outraged, Ian asks if he is being called a beast, and Niccolo teases that Ian has only just begun studying so he cannot yet be labeled one. Ian yells that he has not even started and claims he already knows everything important, insisting he needs no further lessons. Niccolo calmly proposes an alternative test if Ian insists on that claim. He says they will simply discuss some topics, and if Ian truly demonstrates sufficient knowledge, Niccolo will stop visiting. Ian smirks and agrees to the seemingly advantageous deal. He slams the desk enthusiastically, shouting his agreement. Launching into the debate, Ian passionately argues that rulers must constantly guard against betrayal because people exploit leniency, and Niccolo praises his reasoning. Niccolo then presents a book titled Theory of the Iron-Blooded Monarch, believing Ian will enjoy it. As Ian reads, Niccolo explains the book frames ruler-subject relations as transactional contracts between protection and loyalty. Ian finds the argument convincing and remarks that all relationships are essentially give and take. Their conversation continues long into the evening as they dissect more passages. Eventually Niccolo closes his books and signals the end of the day's session. He says they will resume the discussion tomorrow, and Ian, now invested, eagerly agrees. After Niccolo leaves, Ian laughs, then suddenly realizes he has just undergone an ordinary lesson after all. Stunned, he questions how he let himself be drawn into proper study. With a strained smile, he admits to himself that the old man is very cunning. Niccolo walks away thinking the first prince is quite different from his bad reputation. Standing in the palace corridor, Niccolo reflects again that Ian does not match the rumors around him. Later, Ian lies upside down on his bed, bored and muttering to himself. He complains to the knight that he is bored out of his mind. He rolls around restlessly, wondering if he has been too diligent lately since recovering and not training leaves him with nothing to do. A servant announces that Sir Vale Ballarhard has come to see him, and Ian perks up at having a visitor. Adelia asks how to respond, and Ian quickly tells her to let Vale in. Ian straightens his clothes, thinking that after several days since their duel it makes sense Vale would finally visit. Seeing Vale's expression, Ian immediately senses that his uncle is still troubled. Ian notes internally that Vale clearly has not overcome the inner demon Ian implanted. Vale stands in awkward silence, unable to speak at first. He finally apologizes to Ian. Vale admits he broke his own promise during the duel, gravely injuring Ian, and has no excuse. Ian reflects that his real injuries came from overusing the hymn of true dragon slaying, not from Vale's aura blade. He also recalls the queen saying Vale's position was difficult after Ian caused additional trouble. Vale humbly asks Ian what compensation or atonement he wants. He goes so far as to offer an arm, or even an eye if Ian demands it, but Ian scoffs that such self-harm would be useless to him. Ian thinks it is pathetic that a man who could have been a sword master is now crippled by inner demons. Deciding to be magnanimous, Ian announces he will instead grant forgiveness under certain terms. He says he will first state his own wish. Facing Vale, he requests permission to go on a proper outing. Vale points out that since probation ended, Ian technically can leave whenever he wants. Ian clarifies he means a longer trip far from the capital, not just a short day excursion. Vale falls silent, processing the surprising request. He answers that scheduling such a trip will take time and cannot be too distant because of the upcoming banquet, and Ian says that arrangement is acceptable. Vale agrees to contact Ian once the schedule is set, and Ian tells him to do so. After Vale leaves, the knight companion watches Ian quietly, unsure what to say. Ian, noticing the knight's stare, demands to know why he is looking at him like that, prompting the knight to begin to explain. The armored knight remarks that the prince's request is milder than expected, and he had anticipated something far more unreasonable. The prince explains that since the count broke his promise, this situation could be exploited in many ways. The knight admits that seeing the obstinate old count humbled made him feel pity. The prince scolds the laughing knight Karl for acting too relaxed lately. The prince responds when addressed as Your Highness. A maid informs the prince that the letter he has been waiting for has arrived. The prince opens the sealed letter. The letter's contents trigger a magical projection. A woman wreathed in blue power writes that she has recently made a notable achievement. She adds that she will visit him soon and wishes him good health until then. Reading this, the prince is pleased to receive such timely good news. Narration states that 5 days later his uncle sent a welcoming reply, and 2 days after that the departure day came. The royal party sets out from the capital in carriages escorted by knights. During the journey the prince calls to his uncle, asking which territory they will be stopping at. Misremembering the name, the uncle grumbles that the prince cannot stay still. In chibi form, the uncle tells the prince he will explain later and orders him back into the carriage. Narration introduces Ellen County as the royal court's greatest weapon production site. It explains that Ellen has rich iron mines and a guild of mastersmiths to refine the ore. The uncle says that more than half of the royal family's weapons come from Ellen, which delights the prince. The prince thinks that with his cultivation improved it is time to obtain a personal sword, instead of borrowing from the armory. He recalls that because of a royal decree forbidding him weapons, no blades can be issued to him from the palace. He is stunned by this restriction. Acknowledging that his own past behavior justifies the ban, he resolves to seek a proper weapon outside the palace. He grows thoughtful as he rides in the carriage. Watching his uncle, he reflects that the man is more considerate than his stern appearance suggests. As the 20-day journey begins, the uncle orders the carriage window closed, which the prince protests. A map explains their route, first a 3-day trip to Ellen County, then 2 more days to Iron Lion Castle before returning to the capital. Narration adds that they will rest at Iron Lion Castle before heading back, while the prince reflects on his current situation. He sulks that he has to sit motionless in a carriage for 3 days straight. In chibi form he complains that his quiet female companion makes the ride even more boring. Restless, the prince sighs. He decides to use the travel time to inspect his mana heart. He notes that using the hymn of true dragon slaying emptied his heart of mana. He begins cultivation, resolving that it is time to refill that emptiness. He attunes himself to the carriage's rattling, using every vibration as part of his focus. He also incorporates the cool breeze passing through the window into his meditation. Even the distant voices of the knights become part of the ambient stimuli he draws mana from. Gathering scattered motes of mana, he concentrates them to fill his hollow mana heart. Suddenly he sees an enormous whirl of blue energy forming and is shocked. He realizes his mana heart has become far larger than before. A system message explains that by exceeding his limits with the hymn, he briefly connected to a colossal will, enlarging his mana heart. Further messages announce that this feat has transformed his body and that his mana heart has expanded. The system details that his physical constitution has improved and he can now endure much more mana. It declares that he has reached the level known as Sword Expert. Another notice says his link to the origin has strengthened and more of his sealed authorities are unlocked. His third eye and third ear authorities are stated to have greatly improved. Exiting meditation, he notices his maid watching him and calling out hesitantly. In chibi form he stretches and celebrates his advancement. He exults that he has taken yet another step forward in power. The narration shifts back to show Ellen County's grand mansion. Arriving, the prince is formally welcomed with expressions of great honor. The head of the Ellen family, Edgar, and his eldest son Torrance introduce themselves and greet the prince. The prince thanks them for their hospitality, and Torrance offers to guide him to his room to rest from the long journey. Later, the prince walks through the mansion, looking around curiously. Observing the many displayed weapons, he notes that the mansion truly is full of arms, though most seem gaudy and impractical. He and his escorts are led through the weapon-lined halls. Judging from what he sees, he doubts he will find the kind of sword he desires here. He asks Torrance to confirm that the Blacksmith's Guild is located within the territory. When Torrance agrees, the prince states that he wants to visit the guild. The group sets off toward the guild. Walking beside the prince, Torrance explains that blacksmiths tend to be rough and stubborn people. He adds that when they are busy they may ignore even the Lord and speak as harshly as the iron they handle. He asks the prince to be understanding if the smiths seem rude, calling it their craftsman's spirit. The blast of the forge erupts as they enter, flames roaring. Inside, Torrance warns that the furnace heat is intense, and urges the prince to speak up if it becomes unbearable. Overwhelmed by the clanging, the prince thinks about the pervasive sound of hammering iron. Torrance notices the prince's distracted expression and calls to him. The narration highlights the clamor of flames and the hiss of the bellows. Surrounded by fire, the prince steps deeper into the forge. The narration describes the blacksmiths vigorously hammering the iron. Among all the noise, one particular rhythm captivates the prince. He hears one uniquely clear impact among the hammer strikes. He tracks the sound to an elderly shirtless smith working before the furnace. The old man relentlessly hammers the glowing metal with intense focus. Watching, the prince suddenly recognizes that this resonates with his earliest memory. He recalls the image of a golden sword with a blue gem, the first memory that ever came to him. Sweat runs down his face as he stares, and someone wipes it with a cloth. His maid comments that he is sweating excessively. She continues to dab his face while he murmurs in response. Still dazed, he glances aside as she tends to him. From above we see the smiths gathered, the prince and his party watching the old man continue hammering. The blacksmith's leader, Zaxxon, and his men kneel and formally greet the prince. Torrance introduces Zaxxon as the guild master, and the prince acknowledges him. When Zaxxon angrily rebukes the old smith for not stopping to bow, the prince suddenly slams his foot on the anvil to silence him. Zaxxon shouts in outrage, ordering the old man to stop working and show respect to the prince. Irritated, the prince grabs Zaxxon's face and tells him he is too noisy. The prince's eyes narrow as he turns his attention back to the smiths. The young assistant stands silently, anxious about what is happening. The bar of metal on the anvil begins to cool as it sits untouched. The prince thinks that the workers were clearly dragged away from their tasks just to greet him, which he never asked for. He warns the apprentices that the iron will cool and that if they keep standing idle the furnace itself will soon die down. His words jolt them into action, and they rush to grab tools and work the bellows. Arms crossed, the prince settles in to observe the forge again. He stands calmly, fully focused on watching the blacksmith work. The old smith continues shaping the heated metal, sweat dripping as he hammers. Multiple hammers strike in quick succession as the forging intensifies. The prince stands before the glowing anvil, mesmerized by the old man's silhouette framed in sparks. In his eye, the reflection of the blazing forge reveals how transfixed he is. Surrounded by fire, he remains motionless, listening to the steady rhythm of hammer blows. Another bright impact sends sparks flying as the metal is forged further. The prince's perspective narrows, as if he is seeing the smith through a fiery portal of focus. Drenched in sweat, he wonders what this strange stirring sensation within him means. Later, outside the mansion, Torrance explains that for the past 6 months the old smith has been repeatedly forging swords and then melting them down. The prince asks if that means they were all failures, but Torrance replies that it is difficult to judge. Narration states that every weapon the old man makes is normally considered a masterpiece, earning him the title Master Smith of Swords. Even the blades he recently destroyed seemed flawless to Torrance, who cannot understand why they were scrapped. Torrance adds that for the last month the smith has barely slept and has done nothing but work. Because the smith is elderly, Torrance admits the family is greatly worried about his health. The prince reflects inwardly on what it means to be a true craftsman. Days pass as the prince visits the forge each morning and stays until late at night. Throughout that time the old man single-mindedly continues forging each day. The prince simply watches him in silence, never interfering. Narration notes that despite the worries about the prince's visit, nothing disruptive has occurred. Time shifts to night, showing the mansion under a crescent moon. Eventually the day of the prince's departure arrives as he again stands watching the old smith work. He listens quietly to the hammering, seemingly resigned. The old smith keeps hammering the glowing steel with fierce concentration. The prince laments that he had hoped to see the sword finished before leaving. Torrance, standing behind him, is at a loss for words. Narration says that the prince is filled with deep regret. His knight uncle comes to fetch him for the farewell banquet and the early departure the next morning. Torrance senses that the prince's regret might stem from wanting to see the finished sword. Narration suggests that Torrance hoped the prince could witness the master smith's completed work, even for a brief moment. As the prince is about to board the carriage, someone calls urgently for him. Torrance races over, shouting that the mastersmith seems to have finally completed the sword. The astonished prince and his companions hurry back toward the forge. They find the old smith outside at dawn, holding a newly forged sword toward the rising sun. He carefully polishes the blade. The finished sword gleams brilliantly in the morning light. The old man kneels and offers the sword to the prince. Holding the blade, he reflects the prince's face in it and begins dedicating the sword. He declares that the weapon is offered to the prince himself. The witnessing nobles react with surprise at this solemn scene. The prince recalls a smith's song about heating steel like the sunrise and quenching it until it matches the king's crimson robes. The verse continues that by following that process, a sword befitting a son and a king will be born. Narration repeats that such a method births a kingly sun sword, as the prince raises the gleaming weapon. Inspecting his reflection in the guard, the prince asks whether the sword has a name. The exhausted smith suggests calling it Twilight. He muses whether that twilight is dawn or dusk, saying that for himself it is dusk but for the prince it should be dawn. Amused, the prince laughs that the smith is surprisingly poetic for his trade. The old man, tearing up, admits that this is a great relief to him. He collapses from exhaustion, and the prince quickly supports him. The smith lies weakly, having spent all his strength. Cradling him, the prince tells the others to inform his uncle that he will stay in Ellen that night. Night falls as royal knights stand guard outside the camp. Inside a tent, the prince sits vigil at the bedside of the resting smith, Twilight leaning nearby. The old man explains that when the prince first stood behind him, the sword suddenly began to take form as if guided by fate. He says it felt as though the sword itself chose the day of its birth, and the prince asks if that is truly his belief. The prince smiles softly and begins to reply that, in truth, there is more to it. He leans close over the old smith, preparing to reveal what he really thinks. The old sword master is stunned as he realizes the young man's true identity. The prince confirms who he is and says that, being a sword made with someone's soul, he understands the old man's heart. The exhausted sword master pants on his sickbed. Smiling weakly, the old man says he finally understands. He asks the prince to lend him the sword for a moment. The prince hands over the sheathed sword. The old man grips the hilt tightly with trembling hands. Holding the sword, he begins to offer it with a final request. He asks that the sword grow to be as great as the prince himself. The prince looks down, silently taking in those words. Grasping the sword together with the old man, the prince promises that it certainly will. The prince looks at the now motionless sword master. The prince sits at the bedside, still holding the deceased man's sword. The old sword master lies peacefully dead. Night falls over the royal encampment guarded by soldiers. A beautifully crafted sword in a case is presented. A noble explains that while a soul-crafted sword is priceless, it might be impractical for the prince, so he offers another weapon. He presents a so-called magic sword for the prince to accept instead. The prince evaluates the blade and judges it a solid, medium-grade sword. He says that even the master smith's sword alone is an amazing gift, and offering a magic sword on top of that is excessive. The donor nervously praises his family's loyalty to the royal house. Internally, he laments that his plan to trade the flashy magic sword for the master's work backfired and cost him a good weapon. The army prepares to move, ordering the carriages to follow slowly while the cavalry rides ahead at full speed. The prince answers the marching orders. A commander notes that the prince seems busy. The commander remarks he hardly saw the prince during their stay because the king had given him a separate mission. The prince reflects that his side trip was not without a price. The commander tells him to get ready to ride hard to Iron Lion Castle by nightfall, meaning he must ride a horse. The prince admits he does not know how to ride a horse. The commander stares at him in speechless disbelief. As the knights react, the prince thinks that, having been a sword, he never had a chance to ride a horse. On the road to Iron Lion Castle, the prince suffers badly from riding, to Adelia's concern. Their journey includes several mishaps, such as the prince nearly being thrown from his horse. There are more twists and turns with the horse before the journey continues. By the time they arrive, the prince is utterly worn out from riding. Though it took a full day instead of half, the party finally reaches Iron Lion Castle. The prince gazes up and confirms they have arrived at Iron Lion Castle. The castle's knights assemble and step forward to greet the visitors. York of House Wallodin and the Iron Lion Knights formally welcome the first prince of Leonberg. The prince, sensing excessive zeal from the greeting party, comments that their spirit is overflowing. He notes that there is an obvious reason for this intense atmosphere. He identifies the stern female knight, Arwen, as central to that reason. Deciding to stir things up, the prince calls Arwen over. Arwen bows and addresses him respectfully. Kneeling, Arwen declares she has been counting the days, waiting only to see the prince again. The prince observes how instantly the surrounding knights react with jealousy and anger. Adelia appears behind him, radiating a dangerous aura at Arwen's declaration. Realizing that hostility toward him could trigger Adelia, he quickly calls her name to calm her. Adelia snaps out of her murderous focus. She looks confused as her anger dissipates. She answers the prince submissively. While he thinks it is fortunate he had already instilled a slave mentality in her, the prince smirks and, with Adelia behind him, prepares to act further. He orders Arwen to follow him, drawing the wary eyes of the other knights. Smiling, he says they have much to catch up on and hints that it would be good if the knights behind her joined as well. Dressed for training and carrying a wooden sword, the prince stands confidently in the castle yard. Facing assembled Iron Lion apprentices, he announces that he wishes to see the famed swordsmanship of the Iron Lions and asks who will demonstrate it. The apprentices hesitate, exchanging nervous glances. The prince grows impatient at their silence. He offers to remove concerns about status by vowing not to hold anyone responsible for the result of the spar and again asks for a challenger. He goes further, swearing on the Liamberg name that no one will be punished for how the duel turns out, and asks if still no one will fight. A red-haired apprentice criticizes the Iron Lions for cowardice, saying their reputation as the kingdom's best seems exaggerated. That apprentice steps forward, introducing himself as Dale of House Denant. Dale modestly says he is unworthy to represent the Iron Lion's sword but asks permission to be the prince's opponent. He declares he will dare to stand before the prince in the duel. The prince replies that no permission is needed since he asked for a challenger first. Dale charges at the prince with a wooden sword, warning him to be careful. The prince calmly prepares to counter the attack. With overwhelming speed and power, the prince blasts Dale away using sword energy. Dale is struck, coughing blood in shock. The force sends Dale flying and crashing to the ground while the prince stands firm. The prince, his chest glowing with blue energy, casually calls for the next opponent. The remaining apprentices stare in alarm at their fallen comrade. A third-year apprentice, Paul Rotheim, nervously steps forward, thinking his seniority obliges him to fight. He is immediately knocked aside as well, defeated in a single blow. More apprentices introduce themselves by year and are all successively smashed down, despite insisting the Iron Lion's sword never loses. The prince looks bored and unruffled amid the flurry of defeated opponents. The shockwaves of his strikes scatter debris across the courtyard. Soon the training ground is littered with collapsed apprentices, with the prince standing alone among them. He sighs to himself that this was too easy. He remarks that he would now like to test himself against the official knights, chiding them for being slow to react. Arwen is called again, looking startled. The prince tells Arwen that when he returns she will accompany him, and she agrees. Arwen is silently moved by his words. She bows deeply and pledges to follow his will, astonishing the onlooking knights. That night, an official knight addresses the prince ominously, while the prince thinks these opponents are too easy. The cloaked knight notes the prince likes wagers and proposes a small bet to make things interesting. He starts to state his condition for if he defeats the prince, but the prince instantly refuses. The prince rejects Arwen being treated as a prize, declaring she is not something to be wagered, which surprises her. Instead, the prince suggests betting something else and asks Karl to bring him his sword. Taking the ornate blade, he prepares the new wager. He offers that if the knight wins, he will give him this master-crafted sword. Arwen reacts in shock at the stakes. The opposing knight is likewise stunned by the offer. Arwen protests that the prince is far more valuable than any sword, but he counters that a sword master's worth cannot be measured against a mere weapon. She silently absorbs his statement about the value of a sword master. The knight accepts the terms with a confident grin. He introduces himself as Dunham Fahrenheit, an official Iron Lion knight close to achieving the triple chain rank. The prince teases him that this means he is still only a double chain, irritating Dunham. Dunham draws his own prized sword, announcing it as the 17th work of the famed master smith. He declares that if the prince wins, that sword will become the prince's, which the prince notes is quite a coincidence. The prince draws his own master smith's blade to match Dunham's. He reveals that his weapon is also from the same master, setting up a duel between two legendary swords. The prince states that his blade is the master's 100th work, astonishing Dunham, who has never heard of such a sword. The prince explains that it is the smith's final, newly completed masterpiece, and Dunham resigns himself to the challenge. Dunham envelopes himself in lightning-like aura, saying he recognizes the prince's misguided but earnest path and will fight with full effort out of respect. The prince, also cloaked in blue energy, wryly repeats the phrase, misguided path, as he readies himself. He channels intense blue flame-like power from his chest. Comparing Dunham's position to his own, he inwardly deems titles and status insignificant, noting that the role was never truly his to claim. Adelia watches in awe, feeling the respect the prince directs toward her and his people. Arwen and Karl also watch tensely as blue aura swirls around them. The prince resolves that the only respect he needs is that which comes from his own people. He tells Adelia to watch carefully as he shows her the path she must follow, and she anxiously agrees. The prince unleashes a vast, dragon-shaped surge of blue sword aura, revealing the true might of his style. He declares that this path of the sword is the one Adelia must walk from now on. Inspired, Adelia clenches her fist and affirms his order, with Arwen solemnly behind her. Adelia's golden power flares in response to the prince's blue aura, resonating with his determination. She vows that she will indeed follow that path, addressing him as Her Highness. Elsewhere, over tea, nobles begin discussing recent events. A lord asks how many times they have now visited Iron Lion Castle and is told this is the 4th visit. The commander ponders this information. They note that the 4th prince is uninterested in the throne, the 3rd and 5th already visited during the 1st prince's probation, and even the 2nd prince came briefly. The commander reflects that, despite the 1st prince's bad reputation, he was still the kingdom's legitimate heir. The lord rails that the commander bears much blame for the current crisis. He argues that if the powerful 3rd Legion commander had supported the 1st prince even a little, the prince would not have been so isolated. The commander silently acknowledges he once abandoned his nephew, the former 1st prince. He recalls that his nephew was an incompetent, tyrannical drunkard who would have made a terrible ruler. He remembers berating the prince when he was intoxicated by some sinister potion. The enraged prince glared back at him. In that memory, the prince even charged at his own uncle with a drawn sword. The commander labels him a hopeless scoundrel as he recalls the attack. He further remembers that, after returning north disappointed, he received a bottle of poisoned wine disguised as a gift from that same nephew. He seized the bottle, realizing its treacherous contents. Using his mana, he neutralized the cheap poison by drinking it and burning it away from within. In doing so, he also extinguished what little familial affection he still had for his nephew. Yet now he admits that scoundrel appears to have changed. He has watched the prince endure harsh training and grow stronger every day. The lord counters that the commander himself once said the first prince must never be king. The commander insists the current prince is completely different from the one he knew in the past. He asks that the boy be given at least a fair chance to compete with the other princes. Overwhelmed, he bows deeply and begs for this chance. The lord, confused and shaken, admits he cannot understand. The commander replies that he is unsure whether he or the prince has changed more. Just then, a knight bursts in calling for Lord Walloden with urgent news. The messenger blurts out that something has happened with the first prince. As they hurry toward the castle, one reassures the other that Dunham knows his limits, and nothing serious should happen. He adds that even in a live-blade duel Dunham would not recklessly injure royalty. The commander answers that it is not the prince they should worry about but Lord Walloden's knight. Walloden, unsettled, remarks that the commander seems strange and unwell. They arrive to see Dunham slammed into the ground, clearly defeated. Staring at the fallen knight, the nobles cry out Dunham's name in disbelief. The trainees marvel as the prince easily knocks out Dunham and wins yet another spar. Two instructors watch in shock while one reminds the other he had warned this would happen. The prince steadies himself, aura flaring as he wipes his mouth and prepares to continue. Smirking amid blue flames, he says Dunham was never the real threat and calls for the next opponent. He recalls his uncle teaching that a true knight only begins from the level of 2 rings. The prince gathers his blue energy, bracing himself for a serious clash. He acknowledges that his uncle's words were accurate as the double-ring knight's blow crashes down. Thinking mid-fight, he judges his current hymn of sparring too weak yet refuses to use the deadly hymn of true dragons slaying on an ordinary knight. Deciding on an alternative, he activates his hyper-focus trait as the powerful knight charges. With intense concentration and blue mana gathering at his chest, he prepares a decisive counter. As everything goes silent, the double-ring knight swings with full strength at him. The prince feels his body moving almost on its own, overwhelmed by the heightened state. His eye burns with blue flame as he fully enters this trance-like mode. The sensation reminds him of a past moment, when he faced overwhelming power. Locked in that memory, he raises his blade to meet the two-ring knight's descending strike. Their collision erupts in a massive blue explosion that engulfs the training field. The powerful knight is blasted away, shocking the watching students. Breathing hard, the prince lowers his arm after the exchange. Instead of stopping, he calls for the next challenger, stunning the knights around him. He meets another opponent's charge head-on, his sword clashing violently with theirs. He looks down calmly, confident after the flurry of victories. He rushes another knight who braces desperately against his incoming overhead strike. The two exchange fierce blows as the duel continues. With a smooth motion, he unleashes another blue-coated slash. One knight after another is disarmed and sent flying as his attacks sweep the field. He presses forward relentlessly, driving yet another knight back with a blazing strike. His eyes shine with cold clarity as his sword hums with aura. At last his sword tip drops to the ground, signaling the end of the bout. As the sun sets, he stands alone amid a field of fallen knights, still wreathed in blue energy. Exhausted and gasping, he clutches his sword while trying to catch his breath. The surviving trainees cheer that Petan has also been defeated, noting the prince's streak of 5 straight wins. Within his aura, he recites a verse about enduring countless battles and standing firm before any greater wave. A system message declares a new verse added to his hymn of sparring as he vows to rise properly with his sword. The new line of the hymn echoes in his mind, marking a breakthrough. The system announces that hymn of sparring has advanced to extraordinary grade and is being upgraded. The skill's name transforms into hymn of dueling as blue energy cloaks his entire body. Looking at the sunset, he realizes he successfully evolved the hymn. His body finally gives out and he collapses from exhaustion. A knight rushes over, supporting him and asking if he is all right. The knight respectfully praises the great victory the prince achieved. The surrounding knights kneel and loudly proclaim their respect for the sword and spirit of the first prince. The prince is bewildered that the men who had wanted to tear him apart moments ago now revere him. From the sidelines, the nobles remark that soldiers are simple and easily swayed. One noble explains that swords and victory are all that truly excite knights. They tell the prince he must have worried about earning their hatred, judging by his expression. The noble lectures that an honest defeat is worth more than a dirty win and that effort matters more than the result. Some knights joke that only Dunham might resent the prince, since he now has to surrender the sword he bragged about. Overhearing their reactions, the prince thinks it is satisfying to humble the arrogant Dunham and reflects that he thought all his old knowledge was gone with his lost mana heart. Yet he realizes one thing has not changed. He concludes that knights still possess the same spirit, gracious in defeat and revering strength. Time passes, and the prince prepares to depart the stronghold amid a formal send-off. Smiling beside his armored horse, he bids everyone farewell until their next meeting. The count and knights return the courtesy, wishing him health and safety. As he turns toward his carriage, he calls out to Count Walloden. He asks Walloden to keep everything that happened during his stay a secret, though the count wonders if publicizing it might help him. The prince smirks slyly, clearly plotting something. Elsewhere, a man in red uniform ominously muses that there is someone he wants to toy with. On the road home, the royal knights make camp for the night. The commander offers to scout the surroundings, and the prince casually gives permission. Arwen, the dark-haired knight, watches the prince nervously in silence. The prince notes Arwen's unease but assumes she will grow accustomed to him. Yawning at his tent entrance, he decides it is time to rest. Inside, his maid bows and welcomes him back. He thinks ruefully that the girl he accepted is supposed to be an S-rank sword genius yet still behaves like a mere maid. She anxiously asks if something displeases him as he trudges toward the bed. Collapsing onto it, he dismisses her concerns and tells her she may leave. Lying there, he reflects that the Iron Lion Knights were different from what he expected. Using his authority of judgment, he had seen that most knights only possess swordsmanship talent of B grade or lower. He muses that such men would once have barely reached intermediate sword expert even after a lifetime of toil, ordinary people destined to fade away. Yet, in this era those same people now reach expert realms in their 20s or 30s. He concludes that while superhuman calibers have declined compared to the past, ordinary people's level has risen dramatically. Sitting up, he attributes this shift to the system known as mana chain. He recalls that his uncle was once strong enough to aim for transcendence, which is why he had been upset when the man abandoned that path. However, he recognizes that in this era there is barely any opportunity to achieve feats beyond extraordinary grade. Clenching his fist, he blames everything on the changing flow of time. He admits he does not fully understand this era and resolves to start learning it from the ground up. A familiar voice praises that resolve as a good mindset, startling him. His uncle enters, saying it is not too late for the prince to chase his dreams if he works hard, though the prince is confused what dream he means. The uncle points out that he has already won the hearts of the Iron Lions in a way other princes could not. He further calls the prince's earlier decisions wise, leaving the young man unnerved. The prince mentally screams in disbelief, wondering what is wrong with his uncle. He protests loudly, asking if his uncle has gone mad and reminding him of the terms of their wager. The prince assumes the uncle is referring to their bet about defeating the third prince. Instead, the uncle clarifies that the bet was for the prince to defeat a double-chain knight, meaning the prince has already essentially won. Stepping forward, the uncle declares he will now fulfill his promise. The prince stares blankly, not yet understanding. The uncle solemnly introduces himself with full titles as Count and Legion Commander. He then proclaims that he will officially support First Prince Adrian Leon Burke, leaving the prince stunned. Horrified, the prince realizes what that declaration implies. He remembers his uncle earlier telling him to trust him and internally shrieks that he never said he wanted to be king. He narrates that his uncle's announcement exploded like a bomb across the kingdom. Back at the palace, everyone congratulates the prince on gaining such support. New royal knights and soldiers arrive, creating loud commotion. Additional attendants and servants also flood in from the palace. The prince feels overwhelmed as he suddenly becomes the center of attention. He angrily orders the commotion cleared and demands they all be sent back. The commander explains they came by royal decree and will not leave simply by his order. Frustrated, the prince complains that their presence is driving him crazy. At last the room quiets as curtains billow and the noise subsides. Relaxing in his study, he enjoys the peace and comments that it is finally quiet. He starts to speak in relief, but the third prince abruptly barges in calling for him. Adrian wearily asks why his brother has come now. The third prince Gillian accuses him of having played the fool while secretly training under Count Balarhard and hiding grand ambitions. Adrian dryly wonders who supposedly learned what from whom and sarcastically thanks his brother for trying to save his dignity. Gillian declares Adrian has made a grave mistake and vows to make him pay for deceiving him. Adrian, clutching his head, laments that everyone is pushing him toward the throne and resolves to confront the culprit responsible. Facing his uncle again, he begins with a pointed, "So, uncle." He tells his uncle he will go along for a while but wants him to withdraw later because he has no interest in the throne. He complains that his uncle acted without consulting him, asking if Balarhard's safety is really worth all this. The narration explains that Balarhard is the northern bulwark protecting the kingdom from monsters. The uncle replies that as long as the royals remember winter's hardships, the Balarhard family will remain safe. Adrian says that if that is true he is relieved, acknowledging this turmoil would have come sooner or later anyway. The uncle warns that a firstborn who fails to claim the throne often meets a grim fate, and that hiding will not change the situation. He promises to give Adrian time to accept reality, but urges him to remember one thing. He states bluntly that the firstborn's legitimacy only disappears with death. Sitting alone afterward, Adrian insists to himself that he will never change, no matter how much time is given. He concludes that what he truly needs is to reclaim his transcendent authority and power, not the throne. Thus he has no desire for something as trivial as succession compared to regaining that might. He insists he truly thought that way, at least until the upcoming royal banquet. At the banquet hall entrance, his identity as the legitimate firstborn prince of Leon Burke is formally announced. The herald proclaims his entrance as First Prince Adrian Leon Burke, drawing everyone's eyes. The hall is filled with nobles and factions quietly observing, including his allies and hidden figures. Among them, a mysterious woman in a purple hood watches him with a knowing smile. Adrian stands at the podium in full dress uniform as the banquet officially begins. He descends the stairs in a composed, dignified manner. The nobles watch his impressive new appearance as he comes down the steps. Several guests gush that he resembles the king in his youth, while Adrian thinks they are overreacting to him merely slimming down. Looking over the crowd, he wonders if these frivolous people are truly the kingdom's nobles. Using judgment, he sees many guests labeled with the trait Heart of a Serpent and thinks the situation is a joke. He recognizes that trait as evil karma from trampling others, disgusted that nearly all of them possess it. He decides that the only one among them worth paying attention to is Taylor, who stands honestly with his friends. Adrian warmly calls out to Taylor, scolding him playfully for not coming to greet him. Taylor thanks the prince for inviting him, while the narration notes that such uncorrupted people may lack skill but are valuable. Adrian decides that recruiting straightforward people like Taylor as vessels for the future is enough for now. A knight suddenly shouts for attention, halting the banquet chatter. The herald announces the entrance of Marquis Montpellier, the imperial ambassador from the Burgundia Empire. Hearing that name, Adrian stiffens and reacts with shocked disbelief. The guests bow as the ambassador with red-plumed guards steps into the hall. The narration introduces the smiling, round ambassador as Coulon de Burgundia Montpellier. Coulon approaches Adrian and greets him politely, saying it has been a while. Adrian's expression darkens, old hatred flaring in his eyes. He recalls Burgundia as the enemy nation whose armies he fought long ago. He remembers that Burgundia was the nemesis he and his friend battled for years 4 centuries earlier, leaving deep scars on the country. Outraged that this man dares stand before him, Adrian's killing intent spikes. A nearby noble, accidentally, crashes into him, splashing wine all over his face and uniform. Drenched, Adrian stands silently, restraining his emotions. The noble feigns concern and hurriedly asks if the prince is all right, blaming his eagerness to greet him. Bowing, the man offers a formal apology. Adrian glares coldly at him, clearly unconvinced. Across the hall, the ambassador watches the scene with a puzzled look, trying to read what is happening. During the banquet, the prince stands at the center of the hall as nobles watch in tense silence. The prince, stained and exhausted, says he must change clothes while the elderly noble apologizes for his earlier behavior. A knight in lion-emblazoned armor offers to escort the prince, who quietly asks who this man is. The old attendant respectfully identifies the knight as Marquis Bielefeld. Leaving the hall with the knight, the prince thinks Bielefeld proves not all nobles are corrupt, and notes the incident has cooled his head. Later, the prince sits alone, sweating and shaken as he reflects on what happened. A dark uniformed man enters, mentioning he heard there was some trouble. The man, stern and scarred, studies the prince's condition. He relays that Marquis Bielefeld felt the prince looked ready to cause a disturbance. The prince admits the Marquis's concern was not entirely unfounded. Questioned about his intentions, the prince insists he was not acting recklessly but could not understand the kingdom's situation. He recalls that the corrupt Burgundia house wields more real power than the crown and that nobles honor them more than royalty. Narration explains the realm lives in an uneasy, one-sided relationship with Burgundia that can hardly be called peace or alliance. Outraged, the prince demands to know how the country deteriorated so badly. His uncle replies that the story is common, nothing extraordinary. He recounts that the kingdom once repelled repeated imperial invasions with the help of exceptional knights. Over time the empire outgrew the small kingdom, and the power gap widened. Eventually, the kingdom had to submit to the now superpower empire. The prince realizes this history must be tied to a certain power or relic. A map shows the small Leonberg kingdom facing the vast Burgundia empire, yet possessing some special trump card. The narration describes how, from the founding, countless feats were accumulated, from mundane deeds to heroic exploits. Some of those exploits became legends and even myths. All of these achievements are said to revolve around mysterious powers called martial hymns. The prince laments that the kingdom has since lost all of those powers while blue energy flares from his chest. Resolute, he addresses his uncle and declares he has changed his mind. His uncle, surprised, asks what he means. The prince answers that he intends to try truly being a king. His uncle silently processes this unexpected resolve. The prince privately accepts he may regret this choice but believes it is his duty. The next day of the banquet begins at the Grand Palace. Dressed again in his formal red uniform, the prince prepares himself. A herald announces the entrance of first Prince Adrian Leonberg and Lord Vale of Ballarhard as they enter the hall. The prince scans the crowd with half-lidded, appraising eyes. The assembled nobles bow and whisper nervously as he passes. Irritated, the prince judges their greeting as etiquette unworthy even for a foreign noble. He watches them coolly, hiding his thoughts. He recalls how, long ago, no one expected his peasant friend, a country boy with a sword, to ever become king. Among the dispossessed commoners, that boy had not seemed particularly virtuous or special. Yet he advanced anyway, stepping forward with only rough boots on bare earth. The memory shows the young swordsman standing boldly before a crowd as they watch. The prince likens his current stance before the nobles, shrouded in blue flames, to that boy's first step into leadership. Surrounded by that aura, he begins addressing those who refuse to truly see. The blue power spirals around the hall and nobles as they stare, bewildered. He invokes a powerful ability, the hymn of the king, even though his current strength can barely sustain it. A system-like narration notes, most of the hymn is omitted, and he can sing only a quarter of a verse. He endures the strain, thinking this hymn is bearable compared with a far greater dragon-slaying hymn because it is only of hero rank. His eyes flare as he acknowledges the risk. He concludes that despite the pain, no other hymn suits this situation better. The glowing cloak of energy sweeps past stunned nobles. Some of them look on in shock as the light floods the hall. The nobles instinctively bow deeply before the prince, overawed by the kingly aura, and he decides this much demonstration is sufficient. Smiling, he begins to allow them to raise their heads. Suddenly he senses an unfamiliar, ominous energy nearby. He turns toward a hooded figure suffused with sinister purple power. The figure lowers her hood, revealing herself as an elf, which the prince finds unexpectedly surprising. As the elf remarks that someone still remembers hymns, the prince realizes she is not just any elf. She steps forward confidently, and he recognizes her identity with mounting dread. Internally he panics, wondering why this terrifying woman has appeared here. A narration describes the idealized image of elves as beautiful, gentle forest dwellers who cherish life and live for centuries. It notes that this is the common romantic image people hold when they hear the word elf. That idyllic picture is shattered by a hand crushing a bird, hinting at their cruelty. In reality, elves are ruthless beings who use their beauty to destroy foes, with high elves born at hero grade being the most dangerous. The prince thinks grimly that the woman before him is not merely a high elf. Narration reveals she is an elder high elf named Sigrun, a 1,000-year-old dancing magic swordswoman. It further explains she fought in the expedition that slew the mad dragon 4 centuries ago and once tried to recruit the sword spirit protagonist, promising endless excitement. She is also the deranged elf who tormented him excessively in his past life as a sword, obsessing over him regardless of his form. Now, the prince nervously hopes she will not recognize him even though he just used the hymn of the king she knows well. Sigrun peers at him curiously, saying he feels strangely familiar and asking if they have met. He lies that this is his first time seeing an elf in person, repeating the claim when she questions it. She studies him suspiciously, unconvinced. She quietly calls him a liar, while the prince recalls how overwhelmingly strong she already was 400 years ago. He concludes that after so long there is no telling what kind of monster she has become, while she explains that humans typically react to elves with either awe or wary dread. We see men around her falling head over heels, demonstrating how most people are captivated. Meanwhile, seasoned martial experts in the crowd sense danger and grow uneasy instead. Sigrun points at the prince, preparing to judge his reaction. She remarks that he does not seem to be at that higher level of martial insight yet. He deflects with a smirk, saying his personal tastes are simply unusual. Sigrun falls silent, momentarily thrown off. She courteously concludes their brief introduction, saying it was a pleasure to meet him, and moves away. The prince exhales in relief, thinking he has narrowly survived for the moment. The consort selection continues as he quickly dismisses one little girl as far too young. He notes another shy girl who refuses even to look at him and finds her unsuitable. A fierce woman strides up looking ready for a fight, which he interprets as hostility rather than interest. Another small child appears and is again judged as too young. A bizarrely dressed candidate is mentally written off as simply not good. Sitting beside his weary mother the queen, the prince listens to her sigh about his apparent pickiness. She scolds him that a consort must be wise, kind, healthy, and well-born, not like the women he normally dallies with. A servant interrupts to report that the elven delegation requests an audience, and the queen agrees to receive them. Sigrun and her hooded companions approach the throne. Sigrun formally greets Queen Margarita as Sigrun of the Mistletoe clan. The queen welcomes them, remarking that elf visitors are extremely rare. Sigrun says she heard the kingdom was searching for a bride for the prince and asks if that is true. She declares that, as a high elf, her status is equivalent to that of a human noble from a prestigious house. The prince, listening, wonders what scheme she is planning. Sigrun adds with a bright smile that her age is conveniently not far from the prince's, while he internally protests they are nearly 1,000 years apart. He is aghast at how brazenly she lies while outwardly she promotes the idea of an eternally beautiful elf being an ideal human spouse and mentions her loyal followers. She then claims that from the moment she first saw him she felt a special connection. She confesses she believes their fates are intertwined, stunning the prince. The prince recalls that elves never lie about fate, meaning her words must be sincere. The queen reacts with shocked fascination at Sigrun's boldness. The surrounding nobles whisper that elves treasure fate and speculate this might create a powerful marriage alliance. Suddenly the prince strides forward from the throne, startling his mother. He grabs Sigrun's hand and drags her toward the exit. Announcing they need to talk privately, he hustles her out of the hall while everyone looks on in disbelief. Some nobles denounce his behavior as outrageous insolence. Behind a closed door, the prince seizes the handle, isolating them from the others. Inside, he faces Sigrun directly and calls her by name. He bluntly demands she reveal her true purpose, while she coyly insists she only came to deepen ties between her clan and the kingdom. He repeats the question, addressing her as Elder High Elf Sigrun, which visibly unnerves her. He identifies her as the executioner blade of the Mistletoe clan who has carried out the clan's dirty work for centuries. Sigrun, now serious, asks whether he believes she is there to investigate or to carry out an execution. Smiling darkly, she finds him intriguing and demands to know how he learned about her. The prince stays silent, weighing his response. He judges that she is a monster whose true power he cannot yet measure. He reasons that her sensing fate from him means her rank is high enough to glimpse remnants of his past life etched into his soul. Wrapped in her sinister aura, she scolds him for knowing she is an executioner yet daring to remain silent before her. He counters with a confident smile that he understands the danger perfectly. He adds that it would be equally foolish for him to speak carelessly before someone like her. He tells her to stop playing games and warns her not to interfere with his destiny. He concludes that she currently feels only mild curiosity toward him, which he intends to twist into deeper interest. He decides he must become a prize she cannot simply consume and discard, using her obsession as protection. Fascinated, Sigrun demands to know who he truly is. He answers that for now he is merely a pitiable prince abandoned by his father, leaving his real identity ambiguous. Turning away, he tells her that if she is curious she should simply wait and watch. Sigrun stares at him, intrigued and unsettled. She admits she had sensed something strange about this mission and could not understand why she was sent on such a trivial task. Now she decides she was sent precisely because of him and fixates on him as her purpose. The prince shudders internally, reaffirming that she is just as creepy now as she was 400 years ago. Back in the hall, he returns hand in hand with Sigrun, drawing everyone's attention. Onlookers gasp as they see the prince and elf openly holding hands. Sigrun clings to his arm affectionately while he stands expressionless. Facing the queen, the prince announces he has something to declare. To the shock of the court, he proclaims his engagement to Sigrun. Internally, he grimaces at having to say her name so fondly. He resolves that for now he must accept her interest and this engagement, if only to buy time. Out loud he suggests such an important matter should not be decided hastily, and that he will take time to observe. The queen agrees this is wise, using the time to evaluate the alliance's value. The narration adds that for Sigrun, this period will be used to let her desired delicacy, the prince, ripen. For the prince, this time will serve his own plans. He vows to use the engagement period to grow strong enough to eventually escape this dangerous elf. In another scene, someone slams a cup down in fury, cursing the situation. That angry noble rages that the prince has only his birthright yet dares to upstage him. Panting with rage, he struggles to contain his jealousy. He recalls that the prince recently gained his powerful uncle's backing, won over the famed warrior of Iron Lion Castle, and now even courts an elf. Seeing Sigrun's beauty firsthand, he begrudgingly admits the elf's allure surpasses imagination. Smirking, he remembers he is scheduled to duel the prince soon. He schemes that rather than kill the prince outright, he will maim him so badly he can no longer live as a man. With a dark grin, he vows to utterly trample the prince in that duel. Outside the city walls, an older knight in lion-crested armor appears, introduced with a stern gaze. As commander of the Royal Knights, Silver Lion Sturmhild Stuttgart formally declares that he will officiate the coming duel. The notary overseeing the duel assures that the procedure is fair and its outcome unquestionable. As the duel begins, a bored first prince lazily raises his sword, thinking the formalities are excessive. The third prince smugly tells his brother he has prepared a spectacle for him by gathering many spectators. He warns the first prince not to disappoint the onlookers, while the first prince silently notes this has always bothered him. Infuriated, the third prince, wreathed in mana, vows to shut his brother up so he can no longer talk so much. He charges in, declaring his hostility will continue even after the formal duel is over. Surrounded by calm blue energy, the first prince says he had planned to toy with his brother at first. He unleashes a massive blue sword strike, explaining he is too busy now to drag the fight out. The blow sends the third prince flying and coughing blood as he crashes to the ground. The watching nobles and servants are stunned speechless by this unexpected outcome. An older knight, acting as judge, can hardly believe this overwhelming fighter is really the first prince he knew. The first prince looks down dispassionately at his defeated brother. The third prince lies unconscious on the arena floor while the first prince and officials stand over him. The notary solemnly announces that, as witness, he declares the third prince unable to continue the duel. He proclaims the first prince the clear victor, leaving the onlookers murmuring in shock. The first prince turns away with a cold, decisive expression after his easy victory. He internally scoffs at how so many nobles flock just to watch what he considers a childish fight. Among the nobles, people whisper in disbelief that famed Prince Jillian lost to the first prince, who trained only a few months. Later, Jillian wakes in bed with bandages, eyes blazing with rage. He erupts, cursing the first prince who humiliated him. Jumping up, he orders his attendants to ready his gear so he can challenge the victor again. A servant nervously addresses him, prompting Jillian to snap back asking what is going on. The knight reports that the first prince departed the capital with Count Balerhard immediately after the duel, shocking Jillian. The narration shows the royal convoy traveling north through snow toward the Balerhard territory. On the road, Count Balerhard praises the prince's improved riding, and the prince boasts that it is easy once you learn it, earning a muttered remark to be more humble. The count then asks why the prince is rushing north instead of resting after the recent banquet. The prince answers that he has no place in the capital and would rather leave than linger there. He thinks bitterly of nobles who fawn over foreign powers while ignoring their own king and refuses to beg for their support. He muses that he is better suited to soldiers and knights than manipulative nobles, though the count warns that winning soldiers' trust is no simple task. The prince confidently insists that sharing hardships in battle will naturally create camaraderie. The count worries the prince is being reckless, but the prince begins to explain his real urgency. He recalls a dangerous elf woman whose interest in him could lead to marriage and disaster, as everyone she fixated on was ruined. Determined to avoid that fate, he resolves to gain enough strength before she can entangle him. He reflects that such growth is impossible in the peaceful capital, so he must leave to seek harsher conditions. To temper both himself and his sword, he believes he must go to another, more dangerous place. He defines that place as where people are most severely tested. He notes it is also where many of the kingdom's greatest war heroes arose. Concluding his thoughts, he decides that his rightful place is the battlefield. As they approach, the count points out the Blade Mountains, the border his family has defended for generations. In chibi form, the prince shivers, complaining of the cold, while the count tells him he can sit in the warm carriage if he cannot endure it. The prince refuses, saying he must get used to this northern cold. He still feels guilty that an old scholar occupies an entire carriage just to accompany them and asks why the man tagged along. The scholar cheerfully says he wanted to see the harsh north and claims his travel book will benefit the prince, while the prince grumbles inwardly about the annoying old man. Riding on, the prince glances toward one of his knights. He watches Arwen, a dark-haired knight at the front, stoically leading her horse through the snow. Worried she may be freezing in the lead position, he rides up and asks if she is alright. Flustered but proud, Arwen insists she is fine and that as a knight she cannot complain, though he offers to switch places if necessary. His gentle concern makes him smile softly. Arwen privately feels reassured that at least their leader is highly motivated. The prince, however, reflects that the rest of the royal knights seem less driven. He observes his men trudging gloomily and thinks they resent being forced north and would be better handled if his subordinate Carl were here. He recalls the king warning him that the royal knights are not his private retinue to use as he pleases. The king had scolded him for gathering several personal knights, doubting his true intentions in recruiting them, which annoyed the prince. Because of this dispute, Carl was forbidden to accompany the expedition, and the prince privately judges the king's resentment against him to be excessive even if his past self acted badly. As the blizzard worsens, he assumes there must be deeper reasons for the king's attitude but has no time to dwell on them. The count grimly notes they must speed up their march. He warns that if they do not hurry, they will be trapped in the incoming blizzard. Narration explains that the snowfall suddenly turned into a fierce blizzard, beginning a grueling march where even shouting could not be heard. The count looks around tensely, gauging the worsening conditions. He then uses mana to amplify his voice, ordering everyone to abandon the carriages, take only horses, and proceed on foot. The prince realizes the count projected his command with mana so all could hear through the storm. The prince calls to Adelia, summoning her from the carriage. As she steps out startled, he reaches toward her. He pulls the shivering Adelia inside the carriage to shelter her, and she nervously thanks him while he says it is only natural. Arwen rushes up to ask if the prince is alright, and he replies that he is fine but worried about the others. Elsewhere in the column, knights struggle to stay upright with their heavy shields in the violent wind. The prince orders Arwen to look after Adelia's safety while he addresses the troops. He yells at the knights to drop their unwieldy shields. Explaining that the large shields make them unstable in the wind, he commands them to discard all burdens except their swords and retrieve the gear later. He further instructs a big knight to take the lead and orders everyone to line up single file, while the northern soldiers note he needs no help handling the situation and wonder about his combat experience. Narration describes each step of the march as feeling unbearably heavy as they trudge through the blizzard toward a distant fortress. The prince and his closest knights gasp for breath but push forward through the storm. Amid the whiteout, one knight stumbles and lags dangerously behind the group. A companion shouts to the prince that a soldier has fallen back. The prince immediately pushes through the formation, commanding everyone to make way. He reaches the collapsed knight and checks his condition. Hoisting the unconscious man onto his shoulders, the prince carries him himself. Still bearing the extra weight, he berates the others for stopping and orders them to keep marching, prompting them to obey. The column finally nears a massive fortress nestled between icy cliffs. Just as the brutal march is ending, the exhausted prince continues carrying the injured soldier forward. He trudges the final steps up to the castle gates. Breathing a sigh of relief, he curses the blizzard now that it has finally ceased. He looks up at the now clear sky and thinks the storm vanished so suddenly it feels unreal. As he and his people gather outside the fortress, an armored figure steps forward to meet them. Count Balerhard turns at the gate, preparing to formally receive his guests. With a faint smile, he begins his official greeting. The Balerhard banner flutters above the walls, marking the stronghold they have reached. Standing before his assembled knights, the Count declares himself Lord of Balerhard and commander of the 3rd Legion, formally welcoming the first prince. Hearing this enthusiastic reception, the prince smiles brightly, relieved and hopeful. The Count warmly repeats that he truly welcomes the first prince to Winter Castle.